Dash cams are mainly used to protect drivers in court, but every once in a while, they record things that seem to border on the realm of the impossible. Many of the people on this list have stories so outrageous that they would never be believed without some form of video evidence. Number 13. Two friends are having a discussion in a car late one night when something unusual and alarming makes them give pause.
I can see like, oh no, that's just streetlights.
Okay, that's a bit scary.
Yeah.
That's a bit scary.
That is very scary.
That's
Alright.
Sitting motionless in the middle of the road is what appears to be a pale, almost translucent child, silently regarding them with a blank, featureless face. The two friends ask no questions and immediately get away from the scene before anything else can happen. They weren't sure what to make of this child at the time, but they later suspect that it was in fact an unfriendly spirit waiting for them. If this is not a paranormal encounter, then I think this child was perhaps being used as a distraction for a highway ambush, so it's a good thing they got out of there instead of leaving their car to investigate. Let me know what you would have done in this situation. Number 12. This police cam footage was taken during a massive wildfire in Sonoma County, California in 2017. Officers are doing what they can to evacuate the public and restore order, but as this brief dashcam video shows, they were up against total chaos at the time.
I dispatched someone from the fire department in here and dispatched I asked them, he said he is unaware of which way the fire is going. They have so many fires, they can't really keep track at this point, and they also cannot answer.
Listen closely and you'll even hear the dispatcher say that they can't tell which direction the fire is spreading and seems to be genuinely overwhelmed. I have to salute this officer and all of the other brave public officials who willingly charged into a massive blaze to try and help everyone. Number 11. It's a peaceful bus ride in the Russian countryside until the large vehicle finds itself surrounded by a countless number of these winged pests. Everyone inside is terrified as a swarm of gigantic locusts slam into the bus with enough force to rock its heavy-duty suspension system. The sky darkens and the driver and passengers are all helpless as the bus careens through millions upon millions of these oversized bugs, threatening to veer off course if things get much worse. Eventually, they can see the sun and sky again as they come through the other side of the living insect cloud. Everyone is ultimately unharmed, but understandably very alarmed at what they had just witnessed. If the bus had broken down, for example, then they would have been stranded until the never-ending swarm of locusts had passed. Not to mention what would have happened if the windows had broken. Number 10. A police officer in Lincoln, Kentucky is patrolling the streets when he chances upon something quite strange standing in the middle of the road. A tiny figure runs towards his headlights as soon as he gets out of the car to investigate.
Deputy Jeremy Gatney of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office was on a routine patrol when his headlights shone across something running towards him.
The officer is surprised to find a small child standing in the middle of the road without any adults nearby. He instinctively picks the toddler up, and just moments later, a Mack truck plows by very close to where the child was first spotted. It's a good thing the police officer saw the child first, because I doubt the driver of the tall truck would have noticed until it was too late. Apparently, the child had wandered out the front door of his home when no one was looking and took off down the busy road. The family was extremely relieved to have their child back, and fortunately they were not charged with neglect. Number 9. This YouTuber is fairly sure that he's captured a ghost on his dashcam when he's traveling down a suburban road and sees reflective lights on the right. Watch the parked car on the right to see what I mean.
so you know.
Yeah.
I personally think it looks like someone could be stepping into his line of movement here. It happens quickly, so I'll play it again in slow motion. Let me know if you see it. But when he pulls up to where the lights were, he and his friends are surprised to find nothing's there.
Where did it go?
RI, Public Radio, Internet.
They walked in front of the car, right?
Yeah, it was like a wheelchair or something.
Both of them swear they saw the lights and thought someone was crossing the street. I guess his headlights could have been reflecting off of the parked car, but then again, the angle doesn't exactly seem to match up. Let me know if you see it and what you think it could have been. Number 8. A gigantic streak of lightning in Paducah, Kentucky was so large that it was caught by 2 different police dash cams. The first police car was far away, and its dash cam footage shows just how long this massive lightning bolt was, and the second police car was much closer.
If you could go back through it. Well, 2 reasons. One, it would be.
The lightning bolt directly hit a nearby residence. Fortunately, everyone inside was alright, but this particular officer will never forget how close he came to being charred alive. Number 7. A Russian driver is having a casual conversation behind the wheel when suddenly his thoughts are interrupted by a bizarre and unexpected change of events. A large cement truck just a few cars ahead of them literally plunges below the asphalt as a gigantic sinkhole forms underneath its back tires. The cement truck driver soon comes out and surveys what just happened, but there's little for him to do. If anything, he and everyone else should be hurrying to get away from the sinkhole instead of casually observing it. I don't know what happened next, but hopefully the sinkhole did not grow any larger and everyone made it out okay. Number 6. This electrifying event occurred in May of 2017 on the northeastern side of Shenyang City. A white-hot light showers the street with sparks, but it's not from a blown transformer or down power lines. A bolt of lightning has cracked the asphalt with the type of raw power that only nature can generate. It's a good thing that this street was lined with trees instead of power lines, or else this dashcam video would have almost certainly looked a whole lot worse. Number 5. This dashcam footage was taken on a busy road somewhere in India. Nothing looks out of the ordinary until a tiny object performs a bizarre aerial maneuver while hovering above the road. The saucer-shaped object appears to somehow stop and change directions mid-flight. Somehow, none of the oncoming motorists in the other lane seem to notice, which I think is odd, but maybe it all happened too fast for them to see. If not, then I think this dashcam video might be a fake, but I'm curious to hear your opinion. Number 4. A YouTuber named Alyssa Cross is driving down a local road somewhere in the south when she comes across a person who she has never seen before acting quite strangely by the side of the road. You can hear the nervousness in Alyssa's voice. Many ecosystems are still too dangerous for us to fully map out and explore, and with unknown environments comes the possibility of dash cams are mainly used to protect drivers in court, but every once in a while, they record things that seem to border on the realm of the impossible. Many of the people on this list have stories so outrageous that they would never be believed without some form of video evidence. Number 13. as she and her friend agree that it looks like this person could have some sort of strange virus, zombie or not. One can only wonder how many other viral outbreaks began in this exact same casual style of conversation. It appears that if that's not the case, then this person is under the influence of something strong. Alyssa quietly drives past and leaves the stranger behind. Number 3. This mysterious dashcam footage was taken somewhere in Europe years ago and has been stumping YouTubers across the world ever since. When this car takes a left, you can clearly see that all of the other cars in the opposite lane are at a full stop. In other words, there's absolutely no incoming traffic. Then all of a sudden this happens. The car is suddenly cut off by a second car that appears seemingly out of nowhere. Keep in mind that 2 other cars were making a right at the same time, and at no point does there appear to be any space for this ghost car to squeeze through. I've watched this video over a dozen times and still have no explanation, so help me out if you have any idea how this happened. Number 2. Ronald Wiley was driving down a long stretch of road in West Virginia when suddenly no less than 7 trees simultaneously fall nearly on him in his blue pickup truck. He's stunned for a moment and then quickly throws the vehicle in reverse because there are live power lines near that look like they could give way at any moment if Ronald had been going just a little bit faster, or if the trees were growing literally just a few inches to the left. Then he no doubt would have been caught in the middle of this and been a goner for sure. Instead of this outcome, he somehow makes it with only minor damage to a windshield wiper. Before we get to number 1, my name is Chills and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you're curious about what I look like in real life, then go to my Instagram at DylanIsChillinYT and tap that follow button to find out. I'm currently doing a super poll on my Instagram. If you believe ghosts are real, then go to my most recent photo and tap the like button. If you don't, DM me saying why. When you're done, come right back to this video to find out the number 1 entry. Also, follow me on Twitter at YTChills because that's where I post video updates. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person, so if you're generous enough to hit that subscribe button and the bell beside it, then thank you. This way you'll be notified of the new videos I upload every Thursday and Sunday. Number 1. It's late at night in the Russian Urals when suddenly the atmosphere itself becomes unrecognizable. A brilliant flash of reddish yellow light intensifies for a full 15 seconds before dissolving back into darkness as if nothing had happened. Scientists have been able to give no explanation for this occurrence, though this looks like it could possibly be a blast in my opinion. Give me your best guess or let me know if you agree. Either way, this dazzling and silent light show is one of the craziest things I've seen on dashcam by far. Surveillance systems are supposed to keep you secure, but all too often this feeling of extra safety is simply just an illusion. Bad things can always happen in an instant, and during these types of situations, all a surveillance system can do is document the scary events as they unfold.
Hey guys, how's it going? Today I want to show you my awesome new Wix website. It's got everything I love all in one place. Well, of course that means you too, Maddie. Let me show you guys how I did it. I'm going to get started by choosing one of these amazing templates.
Number 15. The Machete Man. We've all ventured into the wilderness. Some of us come out of it just fine, others not so much. Redditor RS Heavy is one of the latter. He tells a story about hiking on a trail in the woods that didn't end in his demise, but most certainly in tremendous fear. He and his group of 3 male friends, one of whom was carrying, headed out on the trail. They were familiar with the terrain and had never encountered anything very strange there, but this time they spotted a man further along the trail, bent over with one of his hands on a tree. No one else was around. When the group was in shouting range, about 50 feet away, they asked if he was okay. They thought perhaps he needed some help. The man didn't respond. The 4 boys rounded the bend in the trail, keeping their distance but hoping to see the guy better. They shouted their concern again, but he still didn't answer. The bravest of the boys approached the guy and quickly stopped dead in his tracks. "Weapon," he yelled back. The man was holding a large knife or machete. When he heard the OP's friend yell, he stood up and faced the group, the blade in his hand. "Hey man, we don't want any trouble." The friend brandished his gun and told him not to come any closer. The stranger remained mute but ignored the order and took a slow step towards the group. The OP's friend who had neared the man began backpedaling, while the friend with the gun repeated his order. Still, the guy remained mute. He took a small step and came to a halt. One more step, halt. Another step, halt. As though he was playing a game, the wielding friend told everyone to leave, and as he kept the machete man in his sights, the group ran out of there. The machete man didn't speed his pace or follow them, but once they were safely out of the forest, they called it in to the cops, thinking perhaps they'd met some lunatic, escaped from the asylum. Now that's a scary thought. Number 14. The Forest Children. Redditor Hamian shared this seriously scary story about an encounter in the forest near Pisgah. The OP and 2 friends went off the beaten path and camped in an area that appeared as though it had been used before. When they tucked in for the night, rain started to downpour and they all fell asleep. They were woken by the thunder in the middle of the night, and only then did they hear some childlike voices in the vicinity of where they packed away their food. In the OP's own words, "We just assumed another hiking group had found our food, but then I realized that I was only hearing kids' voices, sounded like 5 or 6-year-olds. I thought for sure they were animal noises, but then I heard a child. High-pitched laughter. That's when the fear kicked in. What were children doing out in the middle of the forest in a rainstorm at night?" When the voices ceased, the OP thought his imagination had gotten away from him, but then he looked over at his friend and he was horribly pale. Just as the OP was about to ask if he'd heard that, soft footsteps came towards the tent. The thing, whatever it was, came so near that they could hear the leaves crunching beneath its feet. But after a moment's pause, just like that, it walked away. Everything appeared untouched the next morning, and the OP and his friend never talked about the incident. Number 13. Crazy Mountain Man. Redditor C. Wheezy retold a life story that his father once told him. The OP's family is full of outdoorsmen, and when his father was 10 years old, he was visiting a family friend at his hunting cabin. He went to explore the forest. Being only 10, he quickly found himself lost amongst the pine trees of Flagstaff, Arizona. He was scared, so when he came across a cabin in a clearing, he shot toward it to seek help. As he ran towards it, a man stepped out from behind the trunk of a tree and placed a .44 Magnum hunting revolver to his forehead and pulled the hammer back. The boy froze. The crazy mountain man asked who he was. The 10-year-old took ages to choke out the answer and said he was lost and looking for so-and-so's cabin. After a terrifying eternity, the man put his gun away, glared at him, and told him how to get back to his friend's cabin. He also said that he'd better not catch the child on his property again, and he didn't. The OP's father lived to tell the tale. Number 12. The Ghost. This next entry was posted by Redditor Greenhead Slayer. This one will send chills up and down your spine. The OP states that he and his friends were heading up to the mountains during the middle of the winter to go snow tubing. On one of these occasions, a snowstorm hit during the dark of night as the OP drove the vehicle, dragging one of his friends on the tube through the snow. Another of his friends shone a spotlight to the side of the truck. The driver saw a man in a red plaid shirt, an orange baseball cap, and jeans. As we made eye contact, he writes, "I lost all control of my body for probably only 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity." He immediately brought the truck to a halt and asked his friends if they too had seen the man. No one had, but he turned the vehicle around anyway to investigate. The investigation turned up nothing. When they arrived home that night, the OP informed his father about what happened. Then on the news a week after he'd seen the man, a body had been found in that same area, and the police were asking for tips. The OP called in at his father's insistence and told the police what he'd seen. An investigator came by, and the OP said he'd seen that man a week before. The investigator looked surprised, asking the OP if the date was sure. When he confirmed it was, the investigator showed him a picture of the body, dressed in the same clothing. As the OP writes, turns out it was a man who suffered from some mental handicaps and took his life on the mountain 1 month before I saw him. Number 11, the Marine. This entry was submitted to the lineup by the Kessler. OP was taking a road trip with his girlfriend from BC to San Diego when they decided to camp near Crescent City, California. One section of the campground was pretty empty, so they set up camp in one of the remote sites. After winding down for the night in their teepee on the roof of their car, the OP heard someone whistling at around 1 a.m. right outside their tent, to the tune of "When the Saints Come Marching In." Time passed and still the whistling. The OP woke his girlfriend, who was totally freaked out. Suddenly, in place of the whistling, a male voice began to chant, "When you sleep here, you disrespect me, and when you disrespect me, you disrespect the US Marines." The noises continued as the stalker started to spell out words like "flee," and his voice became more aggressive, so they decided they couldn't stay there. They'd never get any sleep anyway, so the OP unzipped the tent and peered outside. Once his eyes had adjusted, he hopped down from the roof, airlifted his guard dog who hadn't done much guarding into the vehicle, and he and his girlfriend took off to find a motel in Crescent City. While the Marines still whistling throughout their great escape, they returned to the campground the next day to pick up their things, and they discovered the Marine wasn't a figment of their imagination. A family who had been camping a few sites over said it went on for another 2 to 3 hours, and it was the scariest thing that their family had ever experienced, he writes. Number 10, Australian Terror. This one comes from an anonymous Australian Redditor who would often camp out in the bushland of his father's property. On one of these occasions, he was camping with 2 school friends. The OP's father told him that he might try and scare his camping buddies that night, so the friends headed off into the bushland, hiking for 4 hours before setting up camp in a clearing. As they searched for firewood, they discovered loads of old bones that almost looked like wood, as the land had previously been farmland. They decided the bones were from cattle. Of course, they also told each other scary stories around the campfire about the real origins of these bones, even burning some of those they'd collected. After settling in for the night, the OP was woken at around 1 a.m. by one of his friends, who said he'd seen a torchlight on the wall of the tent. Thinking it was his father coming to scare the other boys, the OP started playing along, worrying aloud that it might be a butcher of humans or an escaped convict. As he spoke, the torchlight shone on the tent again and then shut off. Sticks and leaves began crunching outside the tent as someone moved around it. Then began the whispering and mumbling. There was more than one person whispering. The OP thought that some of his father's friends had accompanied him. The torchlight shone again, right against the wall of the tent, and tapping began sounding over the roof as the whispering kept on. Suddenly, doubt crept in. My dad had brought some friends in on the prank and convinced them to walk 4 hours through dense scrub in the middle of the night just to shine a torch on our tent, he wrote. It suddenly seemed a stretch. After an hour of terror, the whole thing ceased altogether. The OP's buddies were sobbing, and the moment the sun rose, they shot out of camp. When they arrived home, the OP's dad apologized that he couldn't come out and visit them that night. When they told him about their midnight encounter, he was horrified. Years later, the OP and his friend discovered a shack with bullet holes through it nearby where they'd camped that night. Alongside it, 2 axes, firewood, and a 44-gallon drum of burned clothing. In the end, the OP and his friends were quite lucky. Who knows what might have happened to them that night. Number 9. The Metal Burial. Have you ever accidentally walked up on a secret burial? Redditor Airwalker DNB Music has. The OP was hiking through the UK's dense forest, and as night was fast approaching, he launched back to his campsite. Though he had no flashlight, his phone screen was bright enough to guide his way. Further along the path, he suddenly spotted 2 men with spades pushing something heavy into a hole in the ground that they'd assumingly just dug up. The OP said it clanged metallically as it was pushed in, so he doesn't believe it was a body. The pair then spoke a few words over the hole before covering it again. Creepy, yes. Criminal, maybe, maybe not. The OP would rather think they were just putting a dear friend to rest. Maybe they were burying a robot who expired, he writes. Others on the thread suggest a darker explanation. Lost son of Pluto responded, or they were smart enough to put the body of the guy they took the life of in a metal box so police dogs couldn't find it. Let's hope the OP was more on the nose. Number 8. The Banging. Swedish Redditor Zixer Bunny posted about his scariest encounter with strangers in the forest, and it just might send chills up your spine. He was hiking in a forest at night with a friend. He'd usually go out with a group of 5 or more people, but this time it was just the 2 of them. They were walking and chatting, minding their own business, when they passed near a bridge. The OP heard a strange noise, and he told his friend to listen. They thought it sounded like footsteps crossing a wood floor beneath the bridge, which was weird because there was water under there. They started to get scared, so they decided to leave, but before they could, they saw a man next to a tree in the distance watching them. They both screamed. The OP's friend asked the man what he was doing, and suddenly the whole bridge started to shake. They spotted a man in a black hoodie racing off, and he seemed to completely vanish. When they looked back to see the other man who had been standing next to the tree, he too had vanished. The pair were deep in the forest and had to pass that tree in order to get out. They passed it with no issues, and then came upon an open field. They crossed the field to a less forested area and sat down to rest. Then they heard a horrible banging, like someone pounding on a door. It was emanating from behind the OP. The OP's friend thought it might be a woodpecker, but the sound was just too loud and melodic, and it seemed to be coming from inside the tree, as though someone was trying to get out of it. Fear made them race across the field again, but they still heard the banging. This time it seemed as though it was in the air, echoing. On the other side of the field, they crossed paths with a female jogger, and they asked her if she had heard the noise. She hadn't. They could never figure out what happened that night. Were the men and the sound connected? Had they encountered a ghost who was trying to get out of that tree? They'll likely never know. Number 7. The Slasher. Redditor Foxwoods1 tells this upsetting story about camping in upstate New York. At the time, 2 convicts had escaped prison and were on the run. The OP and his girlfriend had unfortunately gone out hiking and camping for 2 days prior to the national headlines of the prison break. They made camp in a remote area and slept peacefully through the night when, at 5:30 in the morning, the OP began to hear some noise outside the tent. At first it was a few rustles, which caught my attention, but not enough to be alarmed, he writes. Suddenly the rustles are right outside our tent and I am on edge, but before he could wake his girlfriend, the couple's tent was slashed before his very eyes. Needless to say, the OP was completely terrified, but this isn't what you think it is. The OP and his girlfriend were both being piled on by armed men. They were police in full gear. The OP responded by screaming out his identifying information, including his name and address. When the police finally settled down, the couple shared their IDs, and all was well again. The OP later discovered that they were camping near where the convicts were last seen. Though the police were just doing their job, them doing their job was the scariest moment in this man's life. Number 6. Creepy Man. Border Trilogy submitted this creepy encounter story to the lineup. Camping was a lifestyle to the OP, and he and his wife would often take backpacking trips together into the wilderness. On one of these occasions, they were in the middle of nowhere in Maine, hiking along a trail. At night, they'd go off trail a ways to sleep. They had enough food for around 10 days. One of these nights, they were deep in the woods and hadn't come across anyone for several days, whereas they'd usually sleep out under the stars. The weather was a bit damp, so they decided to set up their tent that night. They slept soundly and the OP woke up at sunrise. He got out of the tent and was putting his boots on when about 30 feet away, he spotted this creepy dude posted up just watching him. As the OP writes, he was right out of central casting for creepy dude who takes the lives of campers. Instead of asking him what he was doing, the OP decided to go out another way. He writes, I say something stupid to him, like good morning, please don't eat us, and he just looked at me for a few seconds and turned around and walked into the woods. Surprisingly, the couple didn't get out of there. After this creepy encounter, they hiked on for 4 more days. The OP admits that he was anxious the guy would jump out at him and his wife at some point, but it never came to pass. But he still wonders what led him to stand there watching him and his tent that morning. Number 5. Special Forces. Redditor Mystery CK386 posted about his experience in the forests of Germany. When his father was stationed there in the US Army, the OP would run around in the wild with the local boys, and they were doing just that one night after dark. He was walking through a field towards the trees, headed to a cornfield that he usually took back home. When he spotted some movement near the tree line, he sped up when he saw around 6 figures silhouetted at both sides of the corn rows. In the OP's own words, I froze so hard. One of the men asked in German where he was going. The OP answered in English that he was heading home. As the men came closer, he realized they were in full tactical gear, night goggles, weapons, bags, special forces, utilizing small towns for training. Although this one was scary at first, it was also a once-in-a-lifetime experience. As the OP writes, started off creepy for me, but it actually was pretty cool. Number 4. The Skin Changer. This entry was anonymously submitted to the Occult Museum website. The author's supervisor is the originator of this sinister story. He was a wildland firefighter with the Forest Service in Hell's Canyon, Idaho. The crew he'd been on had worked through the day and night, and he was sent ahead to scout the area. As he headed down an abandoned logging road, he came across a bobcat who didn't scamper away like usual, but just stood in the middle of the road and screamed. Then he shot off up a nearby tree. The supervisor thought this was strange, but continued on. Not much further down the road, he came across a cabin, which actually was strange, because no private structures are supposed to be built on federal land. The firefighter decided to investigate, but found the place was boarded up tight, the windows and everything. Someone didn't want anything getting in or out, the author writes. He discovered a hole to look inside and found that the house was in shambles. Everything had been turned upside down. Getting a little freaked out, the supervisor decided to head back. As he came to the place where the bobcat had stood screaming at him, someone else was standing there, a barefoot Native American lady dressed in a torn nightgown. She didn't move. When he asked her if she needed help, she gave him the same horrifying scream that the bobcat had earlier given him, and then scrambled up the tree just as the bobcat had. Scared out of his wits, the firefighter shot out of there. Later, he inquired locally about the cabin, and a Native American told him that he'd seen a skin changer, and he's been haunted by the memory of it ever since. Number 3, the Moonshiners. Have you ever had a deliverance-like experience in the forest? An anonymous Redditor posted the following story that definitely has some creepy elements similar to the backwoods of Arkansas. Only these events occurred in the deep south of Louisiana. The OP was hiking in the heavily forested woods, and he came to an old county highway. Off to his right, he saw strange blue lights about 100 feet in front of him, headed out of the trees into the road. He walked a little further as the road curved, and he found, in his own words, an old-timey beater of a truck parked on the side of the road with its lights off, engine quietly running. 2 men with wizard beards were loading plastic jugs into the truck bed. The blue light came from the headlamp of one of the men, who had come out of the deep woods. The OP said he hid to watch the old-timey moonshine bootleggers complete their transaction, and he mentioned in response on the thread he could have been in real danger. There are lots of documentaries out there on moonshiners, he writes, and they aren't known as the kindest people. Number 2, the lost child. It's no question that search and rescue teams have some of the most terrifying encounters in the forest. After all, they're thrust into scary circumstances in the first place. Redditor Search and Rescue Woods told the following story, which he labels, "By far the scariest thing that's happened to me." He received a lost child call. A 4-year-old girl had been missing from her family's campsite for 2 hours. The OP and his team dispersed in a standard search format, and his search party partner was a good friend of his. They were talking calmly as they hiked, which is the norm, so that you don't get too anxious and distressed. They'd been searching for 2 hours. When they came to a valley and both froze, they felt a strange sensation, which he describes as like a plane depressurizing. He felt like his body had dropped and his ears popped. Then they both heard a loud blasting sound coming at them from every direction, like a freight train. They couldn't hear each other yelling over the noise. He thought maybe it was a landslide, but cliffs were nowhere near. Then it suddenly stopped altogether. The OP got on his radio and asked the search party members if they'd heard it, but no one had, only him and his friend. They continued in their search, and an hour later, the girl was still lost. It was getting dark, but they continued with no signs of her still. At midnight, they had to turn back. As they were about halfway back, the OP's friend shone his light nearby into some dead trees. He told the OP to be quiet and listen. They could hear the sound of a kid crying. They started calling the girl's name but received no response, just crying. They both started to feel that something wasn't right, and then they understood. The crying was on a loop. In his own words, it's the same little hitching sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. They both took off running. Though the pair didn't physically meet the stranger in the forest, it does seem that some creepo was there, taunting the searchers. Before we get to number 1, my name is Chills and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you're curious about what I look like in real life, then go to my Instagram at DylanIsChillinYT and tap that follow button to find out. I'm currently doing a super poll on my Instagram. If you believe ghosts are real, then go to my most recent photo and tap the like button. If you don't, DM me saying why. When you're done, come right back to this video to find out the number 1 entry. Also, follow me on Twitter at YTChills because that's where I post video updates. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person. So if you're generous enough to hit that subscribe button and the bell beside it, then thank you. This way you'll be notified of the new videos we upload every Tuesday and Saturday. Number 1. The Breathing. This final entry was submitted to the Occult Museum by Kitten in a bear suit. The OP and his father were camping in the Sierras at a quiet site. The OP was awoken at 3 a.m. one night to footsteps outside their tent. He thought it was his dad, who was sleeping in a separate tent, but he often went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. The footsteps stopped outside the tent, and he heard heavy breathing, but he drifted off once the sounds had stopped. Moments later, he was woken again to heavy breathing right above the tent. Whoever was outside was circling, and then the really freaky part, in his own words, "I feel a single finger run the length of my foot through the tent, real slow and methodical. I laid frozen as, whatever it was, stroked my foot for a minute or two, gave a few more labored breaths, and then just stood above my tent for what felt like an eternity before disappearing." Needless to say, there was no sleeping for the rest of the night. The next morning, the OP shot out of the tent as soon as he heard his dad leave his. He told his dad what had happened, and they noticed footprints around the boys' tent, and their camp gear had been rearranged on the table. Though nothing was taken, makes you never want to go camping again. Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe because we upload new countdowns every Tuesday and Saturday. Or if you're still not convinced, here are some of our other videos that I think you'd like. Enjoy!
Number 15. My apologies for the length of this story. I have tried to cut it down some, but it is simply a long story. I'm hoping this is vague enough to remain anonymous because those involved are still out there somewhere and I'd really prefer to not encounter them again. However, I will say that this story happened in the USA. For reference, I was 20 years old at the time, living in an apartment with my mom and little brother while I attended community college. When we first moved in, the apartments were very well run, but within a short time the managers were transferred elsewhere, and his replacement did not have his skill at keeping undesirable types of people out. The police became a regular sight in our neighborhood, and it was rare a day would go by without seeing them. The woman who moved in downstairs from us began openly dealing drugs. People would come and go at all hours and leave, stuffing little bags of various substances into their pockets. Mostly weed, but definitely other stuff as well. They could not have been more obvious if they tried. And there was always a crowd of shady-looking men with large, unfriendly dogs hanging around the yard or even sitting on our stairs. They'd act like it was a personal insult if we interrupted them to walk up or down the stairs, and would just generally be quite intimidating. The breaking point didn't come until their customers started getting the wrong address and coming to our door instead. We'd be sitting in the living room and hear footsteps come up the stairs, and the doorknob would turn and jiggle against the lock. We became religious about keeping the door locked tight. One night, I was home alone and somebody started just beating on the door. Not knocking, it was more like he thought it was a punching bag, all the while screaming barely comprehensible obscenities. I grabbed the biggest butcher knife out of the kitchen and shouted through the door that I was calling 911, and he ran away. In hindsight, I probably should have actually called, but I was just relieved he was gone, and since I hadn't seen what he looked like at all, I just figured it wouldn't be much use. After that though, I always pushed the couch in front of the door before I went to bed. My mom had had enough at this point. She tried going to the manager first and was met with a total lack of interest from her. So she decided there was nothing to be done but contact the police about it herself. So she called about it, and she got off the phone looking happy because they at least seemed to take her seriously and promised to investigate. The first sign of trouble came the next night. There was a lot of thumping and bumping downstairs, and a peek out of the window showed people going in and out of the apartment carrying cardboard boxes to a dented van on the street. Bright and early the next morning, the police raided the place and, you guessed it, clean as a whistle. At first, we didn't realize the implication of this. When it started back up again a few days later, my mom called the cops again, and the same thing happened. At this point, we realized it probably wasn't a coincidence. Somebody in the local police department was most likely tipping them off. One of the curses of a small town. I was angry and disappointed, but at least we tried, right? It never hurt to try. I wish. About a week later, I was getting ready for an evening class. I had just gotten out of the shower and I was in my bedroom in a bathrobe picking out what I wanted to wear. I heard a loud banging on the front door, but I didn't think much of it. We'd been expecting a package and the UPS man always knocked loudly. My mom's footsteps went to answer it and I hear her say something. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone caught my attention and I felt like something was wrong. I reached for my door, but before I could open it, it flew open in my face. All my shocked brain could grasp was, huge man with a gun in my room, before I was grabbed by the shoulders and flung to the floor. I honestly thought the druggies downstairs had come to get us once and for all. I thought I was going to be raped and murdered. At this point, I should mention I'd had an issue with one of my wrists for years due to a childhood injury. I'd had it operated on twice, and this was not more than a few months after the second operation. Naturally, I managed to land with my full weight on that wrist, and something crunched horribly. I did what any tough person would do, and immediately burst into tears and sat there clutching my wrist, waiting to die. I guess I must not have looked very threatening like that, because he stepped back a little bit. And that's when I saw police on the front of his vest. The next few minutes were a bit of a blur. Somehow, I was herded out into my living room where my mom was, and the cop left without saying more than, "Wait here." I was completely dazed. My mom was pretty much having hysterics, and there was all kinds of shouting and activity going on outside. After a short while, the cop returned and informed us, to paraphrase, "Sorry, wrong address. Shit happens, we can't be perfect all the time. My name is Officer Shinkin, here's my card, and you can call if you have any questions." And then he just left. I went straight to the emergency room and spent the next 2 hours getting my wrist x-rayed and put into a splint. And then I went to math class because, I didn't know what else to do, and I was terrified of being at home. Needless to say, I learned nothing whatsoever, but the support of my teacher and classmates was reassuring. The next morning, somebody knocked on the door. When my mom answered, it was Officer Shinkin again. When I heard his voice, I started hyperventilating and went to hide in the bathroom. So, I didn't hear what was said, but I heard when my mom slammed the door. She was absolutely furious. I had never seen her look so angry. Apparently, good old Officer Shinkin had brought along a carefully prepared document that he wished for us to sign. It basically said we understood that it was all a terrible mistake and that we would not be seeking legal action. She told him to go to hell and shut the door in his face. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It was one of the nurses at the emergency room saying somebody claiming to be law enforcement had just come by trying to get copies of my emergency room visit records. But they didn't have permission to release those, and if I wanted him to have them, I'd have to come by and sign the forms. Oh hell no! Further questions revealed that yes, the man matched Officer Shinkin's description, and furthermore, he had told the nurse that he was not the officer involved, but was investigating the incident. I started to find that pretty much everyone that I told my story to would get a funny look on their face and say, "This cop, was his name Officer Shinkin?" And then they would launch into their own horror story about him. My high school teacher said that he shot one of her former students during a marijuana bust and left him on the ground to bleed to death. But the other officer on the scene did first aid and saved his life. One of our neighbors said he dragged said neighbor's disabled uncle down a flight of stairs by his feet, hitting his head on every concrete step. Another neighbor said Officer Shinkin pulled him out of the shower by his hair and held a gun to his head over a parole violation. And Google said he'd once been fired from a nearby city for shooting a handcuffed man in the head, killing him. He claimed it was somehow self-defense and was fired, but never charged with any crime. The medical bills for the ER visit ended up being over $7 grand, and I didn't have insurance, so basically I had no choice but to file a suit. I found myself a lawyer and submitted a claim, and that's when shit really hit the fan. We started getting disturbing phone calls at all hours of the night. Sometimes just silence at the other end, or the sound of somebody breathing, and sometimes graphically sexual comments. When we stopped answering the phone, they just let it ring until the machine picked up, then immediately hung up and then did it again. My mom went to her car one morning and opened the door, only to discover the handle had been coated in some kind of caustic chemical. She washed it off quickly, but still ended up with burns and an emergency room visit. I'd just gotten my permit and I was out for driving practice when it began to rain as I went down the highway. I flipped on the windshield wipers and discovered they'd been coated with grimy motor oil. It smeared across the windshield and completely obscured my vision. Fortunately, the road was empty enough I was able to slam the brakes and pull to the side without getting in an accident. Other things started happening too. Less severe but sinister given the context above. Somebody cut out a bunch of metal malicious skull designs and tacked them to our wall or pushed them under the door at night. What the fuck? I still have no idea what that was supposed to accomplish. Furniture was stolen off the porch, my boots vanished when I left them out there, and oddly, several pounds of weed in a plastic sack appeared on our porch one morning. My mom called the manager to get it without going outside. For once in her life, the lady did something useful and actually fetched it and threw it in the dumpster. I have never felt so helpless in my life. What was I gonna do? Call the police? It was around this time that a friend who lived abroad suggested I come stay with him for a while for my own safety. I dropped out of school and left the country for 6 months while the lawsuit worked its way through the courts. My mother and brother moved in with family and then to another town without submitting a forwarding address. Eventually, my tourist visa ran out and I had to come home. I was a complete nervous wreck and I ended up settling out of court for a relatively small sum of money just to make it over. My lawyer got a copy of the search warrant they'd used. It was riddled with grammatical errors and switched my apartment number, 18, and the number of the unit down the street, 25, at random. The suspect was somebody with an entirely different name, who looked entirely different from any of us, and who apparently sold some OxyContin pills. She lived in Unit 25. I saw a copy of her driver's license. It said right on the front of it, in nice clear letters, Unit 25 as her address. I don't know, I have no proof, but it was obvious that somebody had been tipping off our drug dealers downstairs, and I often wonder if the wrong number on that warrant was not a mistake at all. Perhaps it was meant as a retaliation for trying to get their friends in trouble. I've now regained full use of my hand, which my doctor had told me might never happen. I no longer have a heart attack at loud noises, and I only feel slightly uneasy when I see police uniforms rather than having full-on panic attacks. It's 6 years later, and I'm only now beginning to reclaim my life, kick the PTSD, and going back to finish school. I feel like I lost the best part of my 20s to these jerks, and I'm still bitter about it. I currently live with friends in an informal situation. My real address is not on any documentation, and I get all my mail in a PO box in another town. Depending on which document you're looking at, I supposedly live in 5 different places scattered from one end of the county to another. And I'm not going to change that until I move a lot further away from where all this happened. As far as I know, nobody involved ever faced any sort of consequences.
Number 14. A few years ago, I was at one of the lowest points in my life. My wife had left me, so I was alone, heartbroken, and depressed. I don't have many friends, so I had nowhere to go. I would just walk around stores for hours, so I wouldn't have to be home alone by myself, thinking about how shitty my life was. I very nearly committed suicide on more than one occasion, but somehow talked myself out of it. During this time, I happened across an adult webcam site that I would hang out on, not only for the obvious reason, but also because you could actually chat with people. Eventually, I started broadcasting myself. If you've never been on one of these sites, think Twitch but with nudity. People can view your cam, tip you, and subscribe to be notified when you're online. I didn't have many people in my room at first, but eventually, I started to get a few anonymous viewers, and it was kind of exciting that someone was watching me. Before long, I was up to dozens of viewers and a few subscribers. I even started getting some tips and making a little money doing something that, let's face it, I'd be doing every evening anyway. It was mostly guys watching me, of course, but even though I'm straight, it didn't bother me too much. It gave me people to talk to at least. From time to time, however, I would get females, or at least guys saying they were female. Eventually, a girl named Britt started stopping by regularly. She was different from most of the people I had met on the site, because she actually seemed interested in talking to me, and I, of course, enjoyed the attention. Whenever she'd stop by, the whole room would become a lot more fun. We started private messaging, and I even made her a moderator for my room. She asked me if I had Kik, which at the time I had never heard of. But she explained that it was a texting app that you didn't have to give out your number to use. So we started chatting offline using it. We would talk for hours. I found out that she lived halfway across the country, which I actually liked because there was no pressure to meet in person right away. We sent pictures, and she was very attractive, and at some point we began sexting one another. Even though I doubted much would ever really come of it, it was great for me, because it gave me someone to talk to, and it was really helping me rebuild my shattered self-esteem and confidence. This went on for a few months, and eventually, we started talking less and less. I had kind of expected that this wasn't going to go anywhere, so it didn't bother me when she stopped responding altogether. I had never held any illusions that this was going to be some long-term relationship. I figured that she found someone real near her, and decided that someone she could actually be with was better than a long-distance fling with someone she had never even met in person. It was fine. By this point I had met a few girls myself, so I wasn't too upset. I did miss chatting with her sometimes, because I had really enjoyed talking to her, and she'd been there for me during a pretty dark time. Anyway, I went on with my life, and started dating someone, and we ended up going on a trip to a beach together. A couple of days after I got back, I got a message from Britt, asking if I was in Florida. What the fuck? How would she have known I was in Florida? I said no, but that I had been there last week. She said that she was there now, and we must have just missed each other. We talked for a bit, and she asked me where I had stayed, and told me she was just down the street from that hotel. When I told her that I had been there with someone, she got pretty upset, and then stopped messaging me again. I was a little confused, and more than a little weirded out that she had known where I was, but I didn't think too much of it. I told myself it must have just been a strange coincidence, and I forgot all about it. Then, things took a turn for the worse. A few weeks later, I get another message from Britt, late at night, after my girlfriend had gone to sleep. It said, "Who the fuck is she?" I had no idea how to respond. I asked her what the fuck she was talking about, and she went on to describe my girlfriend and asked me why I thought I could get away with cheating on her. I was literally floored. Not only had I never been in an actual relationship with Britt, I had never even met her in person. On top of that, she had stopped speaking to me for months, and now suddenly knew what my girlfriend looked like, and was accusing me of cheating on her. I expressed all of this to her, and then asked her how she knew what my girlfriend looked like, thinking she was Facebook stalking me or something. Her reply made my jaw drop, and felt like someone had just tossed a brick into the pit of my stomach. "Because I can see her in your fucking bed." I immediately closed the blinds and checked the house, and made sure the doors and windows were locked. I told her that we had never been in a relationship and that we were most definitely not in one now. I asked her to please leave me alone and not contact me ever again. She just responded, "Lol," and a smiley face. It was at this point that I noticed the light on my webcam was on. She had somehow hacked into my computer and turned my fucking webcam on. I unplugged it and threw it in the closet. Britt then sent me another message. "Oh, you're no fun anymore." I reiterated that this was unacceptable, that I didn't want to talk to her again, and that if she didn't leave me alone, I would contact the police. Then I blocked her from every form of communication I have ever used, and uninstalled Kik. The next day, I had my cable company change my IP address, and I haven't heard from her since. But I'm still paranoid that this isn't over.
Number 13. To start out, this story sort of takes place on and off again throughout most of my life. It starts out as a typical, my parents got a divorce when I was young situation, but it unfolded into so much more. In fact, I'm still picking up pieces of everything that happened. Just a warning, there's a lot of backstory that I feel is important to understanding what happened. As it stands now, my father is dead. It was ruled a suicide, but I think that was only half of what happened. I'll talk about everything that led up to this, but more importantly, I believe that Mary definitely had a hand in what happened. My mother and father divorced when I was around 4. Almost everyone I know has gone through some sort of similar situation. I have 2 brothers, one older and one younger. We saw him every other weekend. He paid child support. You get the gist. One weekend visit, my father introduces us to a woman he's seeing, named Mary. Her eyes and hair are dark, and her skin is pale. She had an obsession with the color red. Something was immediately off to me, but I didn't really start to know what she was capable of until later. My mother hated her, but she never badmouthed my father or Mary in front of my brothers and I. She felt that it was important for us to make judgments for ourselves, even if this woman was part of the reason her marriage was broken up. We continued to visit what was now Dad and Mary's house on our scheduled time with Dad. I always associated their house with red. Their house was always decorated with strawberries. Mary liked red sheets, and she had red sweaters and pants. It was weird. Mary was just unnecessary drama for a while. Things like buying us toys that we could only keep at Dad's and Mary's house, or saying that she and my father wanted to get custody of us instead of my mom. I feel like these things were harmless in a way. Every divorcing couple probably has some sort of variation. Things carried on like this for a couple of years. We would have a special variation of Christmas or Easter or whatever aside from what we celebrated with my mom. I was about 7 or 8 when I remembered the first incident that confirmed I knew this wasn't right. My little brother was a super curious child, and he was about 4. He had scooted a dining table chair to the fridge to get a cereal box on top, and when he reached up, he pulled down a handgun instead of a box of cereal. I panicked and got my dad, who acted really funny about it. My memory is fuzzy, but I remember going home early that weekend. My dad didn't know the gun was there, because it was Mary's. It was at this point that my mom started having trouble with us going over there. My father got worse about being able to come pick us up. He was unreliable for the most part to begin with, but I know that he was 10 times worse when he was around Mary. My mom told me later, when I was much older, that Mary called our house around the time of the gun incident and said, "I want your life." My mother is a really tough lady. She grew up in East LA in California, and this scared her. She was going to get a restraining order soon. I guess what Mary meant was that she wanted my mom's stability. Even as a single mom with 3 kids, she was doing very well for herself, and even dating. But even so, how long had she been obsessed with my mom before she and my father even got divorced? What did that even mean? Not long after the phone call, my mom heard her car being smashed into one night. Someone had taken a brick and smashed the driver window. Nothing was taken. I know it was Mary. We had no way to prove it, but I just know. My dad and Mary had a baby. Her name is Madison. I only remember holding or playing with her for so long. I can't imagine all the shit she's been through. My mom met and married my stepdad pretty soon after that, and they decided that it would be best to move to Florida. We had other family there, and there weren't many jobs where we were living in Tennessee. I don't remember any problems at all when we were so far from my dad and Mary. We stayed for about a year, and then we moved back to Tennessee. My stepdad was able to get a better job again, and we were closer to my mom's parents. This is when the phone calls start. As soon as we moved back, we would get phone calls where someone would just listen for a few minutes, and then hang up. The numbers were always blocked, but I'm sure it was her. She always knew where we lived, because we started seeing my dad again. The calls continued for years. It became like an inside joke. We all knew who it was, but there wasn't anything we could do. My father denied it. Anytime I asked him about it, he took her side. We fell into this thing where my mom was the bad guy, and anytime I questioned my dad and Mary's behavior, they were sure my mom was putting me up to it. Things escalated one night when my dad came to pick us up for a visit. My mom and Mary ended up getting into a fist fight, where Mary swung her fist, and my mom punched her so hard she fell backward. My brothers and I watched from the apartment we were living in at the time. Mom went immediately to the police, but my dad and Mary never even called. My mom didn't press any charges, and the whole incident sort of faded away. We ended up moving into a big house a while after that, where we still are today. Dad and Mary started to have problems and split up. I thought maybe she would be gone for good, or at least gone for the most part, but she never really went away. My dad started to become a person we could somewhat rely on again when she was gone. I got to know my little sister more, the baby they had, and things were okay. She started coming around again though. Whenever she was with my dad in front of us, she would whisper in his ear. My dad would drink more. He became physically ill-looking and would start to gain weight. We could always tell when Mary was around because the difference was so drastic. He even officially divorced her at one point, but it was obvious that they still got together off and on. My brothers and I went on with our lives, and we became too old for visiting the way we were. Whole weekend visits became just going to see my dad for an evening. The whole time, however, the phone calls never stopped. They weren't as frequent, but they were there in the background, like a reminder that she was always there lurking. When I got into high school, visits from my dad just about stopped altogether. We usually talked on the phone here and there, and I saw him when I had events like a marching band competition, a formal dance, milestone, like graduating high school. It was pretty common to go a while without hearing from him sometime. Mary was only a thought. I hadn't seen her in years. I never saw her anywhere, at all. The phone calls had stopped, but only because we had gotten rid of the house phone. I was a freshman in college, and I remember it being right around Halloween of 2009. I was shopping with my aunt for some cheap decorations at the Walmart by my house. I saw a woman walking slowly behind us, and my aunt and I both did a double take. It was Mary. She was totally following us around the store. She looked like she was maybe 50 years older than when I saw her last, and her clothes were disheveled. My aunt kept elbowing me to go talk to her, because we weren't exactly sure if this was really her. It could have been someone who just looked really similar. I worked up the nerve and went up to her. "Is your name Mary?" I asked. "Yes, it is. Hi, Sam. How are you?" Using my name like that really caught me off guard. She knew who I was and wasn't bothered to talk to me. She didn't even act like she was being caught. I asked her if she had talked to my dad lately because it had been a while since I heard from him. She swore up and down she hadn't spoken to him for months, which I later found out was a lie. This was the beginning of my dad going missing. After I saw her, something happened, and it's hard to pin down what, but he completely disappeared. His cell phone was shut off, and when I called his work at the casino, where he had been working for 15 years, they said he was no longer working there and couldn't tell me why. My mom and brothers and I called the police to
An urban legend is a form of modern folklore consisting of stories that may or may not have been believed by their tellers to be true, but are made to sound believable to their audience. And just like creepypastas, the scariest urban legends are the ones that actually happen to real people. Some live to tell the tale, while others weren't so lucky. So today, I'm going to count down the creepiest urban legends that turned out to be true.
Murderous surgeon. Hundreds of lives are placed into the hands of skillfully trained surgeons every day. But there's a tale about a murderous psychopath who went through years of medical school and training just for the perfect opportunity to mutilate someone. There was such a surgeon named Glenn Tucker, and wherever he went, he left his patients mangled and damaged. After years of deceit and ruining lives, Tucker flew to Florida, leaving behind numerous stitched-up patients. He killed himself years later, along with his wife and family cat.
Elevator decapitation. This urban legend is about someone being trapped in a stuck elevator. The victim tries to escape by opening the elevator doors himself and crawling out to get help. Once he's halfway out, the elevator restarts and crushes him by the elevator doors. Elevator number 14 of a Houston hospital was out of order for a few days. The next day, however, the out of order sign was gone, so Dr. Hitoshi Nikaido assumed it would work just fine. He stepped into the elevator, but the doors closed early and pinned his torso. As the elevator went up, it sliced his head in two at mouth level, leaving only his left ear and lower jaw attached to his body.
Toxic fumes lady. A woman dying of illness is brought into the emergency room of a hospital, When nurses tried to get a blood sample, strange toxic fumes escaped the woman's blood. These fumes caused all of the nurses to feel lightheaded and even lose consciousness. They had no control over the movement of their limbs at all. The nurses became critically ill over whatever was in that woman's blood. In February of 1994, a woman named Gloria Ramirez was sent to the hospital because of her cervical cancer. The staff injected her with fast-acting drugs and pumped air into her lungs, but to no avail. She was responding poorly to the treatment. They attempted to revive her heart using electricity, so the staff tore off her shirt, only to discover a strange oil sheen covering her body. A weird garlicky scent was also coming out of her mouth. The hospital staff started to gag and collapse. Some felt queasy and couldn't breathe correctly. The ER was evacuated and a decontamination unit was brought in. The dead body rolled in a carpet. Somebody finds a beautiful old rug in an alley, refrigerator, or wardrobe and decides to keep it. What that person discovers inside the carpet is the last thing he would have expected: a dead body. 3 Columbia University students found the rolled up carpet at their school campus. They decided to bring it to their dorm as a decoration, but soon they discovered in the rolled up carpet was the body of a black male in his 20s with 2 bullet wounds in his head.
Rat in the toilet. There are about 2 million rats in New York City alone, so is it possible for one of these disease-filled rats to crawl through our sewer systems and sneak into our bathrooms? In 2002, a man named Ian Meyer came home from a party with his girlfriend. After a night of drinking, he heads to the bathroom to find a rat in his toilet. According to Ian, the rat was completely as stunned as he was, and it took him a moment to get himself together. Once he did, he closed the toilet seat and tried to flush the rat away, which only made the rat angrier. Ian ended up killing the rat in the toilet, but is now extremely paranoid and going to the bathroom.
Killer cop. A police officer knocks on the front door, alerting the family of a loose killer. The officer asks if he could come inside to explain further details, to which the family agrees and lets him in. Once he's in, the cop reveals that he is the killer. This has happened several times before with some other criminals, but the most well-known case involves one of the most infamous serial killers ever, Ted Bundy. Bundy approached a woman named Carol Durant at a shopping mall in Utah. Dressed as a police officer, Bundy told her that her car might have been broken into and to come with him to the police station to file a report. All was well, until Carol saw not a police car, but a VW Bug as the officer's vehicle. She could also smell alcohol in his breath. Once inside, Carol realized that Bundy was driving the opposite way towards the police station and tried to escape. Bundy handcuffed her and even pulled out a gun, but she managed to escape onto the road and got into the first car she saw. She was then taken to the police station where the handcuffs were taken off her. Later that night, Bundy kidnapped a 17-year-old girl, never to be seen again.
The corpse in the deep end. We've all heard stories of people finding band-aids, diapers, or other disgusting things in public pools. Then there are the campfire stories of people finding bodies in the deep end of lakes. The body of 36-year-old Marie Joseph was found rotting in a public pool after a 9-year-old boy saw Marie go underwater but not resurface. He immediately told the lifeguards. They dismissed it. In fact, nobody noticed Marie's body for 3 days. That Monday, children swam in a pool, unaware that there was a body at the bottom.
Frozen alive. Legends of people being frozen alive and miraculously surviving after being thawed out have always existed, despite scientists claiming that it is not medically possible. However, when a 19-year-old woman named Jean Hilliard was rushed into the hospital completely frozen solid, she was in a car crash and had to endure temperatures of 25 degrees below zero. Her arms could not move, and she soon had ice clinging to her. Eventually she was found by her neighbor and was rushed into the hospital. The doctor said her skin was like ice itself, and she was white as snow. There was also concern over possible brain damage and physical defects. Amazingly, she survived after 2 to 3 hours of the thawing process and was seemingly unaffected by what had just happened. She would be released a little over a month later with virtually no sign that there had ever been any danger at all. To this date, it's a case of a largely unexplained medical miracle.
Call from beyond. This urban legend is about a man who, after a tragic death, was able to make calls to his family through his cell phone. In September of 2008, a commuter train carrying 225 people and going 83 miles per hour ran through a red warning light and crashed into another train, injuring 135 people and killing 25. This incident became known as the Chatsworth crash. Anyhow, the family of one of the victims who was killed in the car crash started receiving phone calls from his cell phone. Strangely, family members were being called one after the other, all while his body was being recovered from the wreckage. How this happened remains a mystery.
The corpse in the chimney. After a person goes strangely missing, his or her loved ones search for the body, but to no avail. That is, until the family begins to smell something rancid in the fireplace. It turns out to be the decomposing body of the missing person in the chimney. While this urban legend was probably told to keep kids away from playing in the chimney, a similar event occurred in 2011 when Dr. Jacqueline Kodarak tried to sneak into her boyfriend's home through the chimney. She's been involved in an on-again, off-again relationship with this man and was trying to force her way into his home. Unfortunately, she died in the chimney and her body remained stuck for 3 days before being discovered by the house sitter.
Kidney thieves. A tourist visiting from another country makes a new friend at a local bar. The two head to a hotel room where he ends up passing out. When the tourist wakes up, he finds himself in a bathtub filled with ice, a note that says "Go to the hospital if you want to live," and a missing kidney. This is known to happen in parts of India, where organ trafficking and the black market are very lucrative. An Indian construction worker agreed to work for a new company after being promised $1 extra added to his daily wage. After a few days of waiting for work to begin, he was drugged by 2 masked men. He reported waking up and feeling pain on the right side. The men said, "We have removed your kidney and you better not breathe a single word of it." Police say he wasn't the only victim. A large number of poor labor workers have had their organs robbed for the black market.
Death by garbage truck. Kids are taught not to hide or play in garbage containers due to urban legends about people being taken away crushed by garbage trucks. As it turns out, this has happened multiple times. In one instance, a 17-year-old in Luxembourg who was hidden in a garbage container was crushed to death inside a garbage truck. The teen wasn't noticed at first, but began to cry out as he was being dumped into the truck. The workers noticed, but by then, the crushing process had already begun, and it was too late.
Dead body under the bed. After a couple stays in a hotel room, they immediately smell of foul odor. The next morning, after complaining about the smell, an investigation leads to the couple discovering a dead body under the mattress. This has actually happened several times before in Las Vegas, Kansas City, Atlantic City, and more. For instance, on July 10, 2003, a man checked into the Capri Hotel in Kansas City. He complained about a foul odor in his room, but management told him nothing could be done about the problem. After spending 3 nights, he checks out because he couldn't stand the smell any longer. When the cleaning staff came in to clean the room, they lifted up the mattress and found a man's body in the advanced stages of decomposition.
Halloween hanging. A creepily realistic Halloween decoration of a woman being hanged from a tree is seen by local neighbors, though what they assume to be just a scary prop is actually a real body and a real suicide. In Frederica, Delaware, a 42-year-old woman hung herself from a tree nearby and stayed that way until the next day. Her suicide was left unreported for hours because local residents saw it as just a joke or scary decoration for Halloween. The body was suspended 15 feet above ground. Even passing drivers could see it. Someone finally realized that it was an actual suicide and called the police.
Intentionally infected with AIDS. This story involves a young girl at the movies or at the club when she feels a small pinch on her arm. Then she hears someone whisper, "Welcome to the wonderful world of AIDS," before they escape unseen. The girl discovers a small needle on the floor and runs to the hospital only to find out that she now has HIV. This attack is known as the pinprick attack, and there have been numerous cases involving people being stabbed with syringes or needles with infected blood on the tip. On July 22nd, 1990, prison officer Jeffrey Pierce was attacked by Graham Farlow, a prisoner who stabbed Pierce with a syringe full of his own HIV-infected blood. Pierce was given immediate medical attention, but despite this and the 1 in 200 chance of being infected, he tested positive for the disease and passed away because of the illness in 1997.
The murderous chef. Like the finger that was found in Wendy's chili, or maggots found in McDonald's meat. We've all wondered what is really happening in the kitchen when our food is being made. A Lomita chef, David Vids, admitted to killing his wife, Dawn Vids, and attempted to cook his wife's remains in order to destroy the evidence. Vids was found guilty of second-degree murder in a trial that included an audio recording of him explaining the 4-day process of cooking his wife.
The body after she was dead, what'd you do with it after that?
I boiled the water.
And what size of a vat?
It was big. Like glass.
So you're 50-gallon or
bigger?
55 gallons?
Heavy to be a carry.
You put her body in there? Her whole body fit in there?
Her body's in there.
And then what'd you do with that?
I manipulated so the face was facing down, and I took some things that like weights that we use, and I put them on the top of the body, and I just slowly flipped it. And ended up cooking for 4 days.
You cooked Don's body for 4 days? So then, and then what'd you do with it then?
Halloween stunt gone wrong. In 2001, a 14-year-old boy named Caleb Rebb was working at a local haunted hayride attraction in Michigan. In an attempt to make the hayride scarier, Caleb tied a noose around his neck. Something went wrong, and Caleb actually died. People witnessed him desperately struggling from the noose tied around his neck, but assumed it to be acting.
Something off about this picture. Have you ever looked at a picture and began to suspect that something was off? You don't know what it is. Something is just wrong with it. In the late 19th century, post-mortem photography was a normal part of American culture. These photos would be of a deceased person, dressed up with their eyes open and sitting still for a few minutes for the picture to turn out properly. These photos would help the grieving families and represent a visual remembrance of the deceased. Black water. A family moves into a new home to find that all of the water is completely black. The family doesn't believe it's nothing too bad, considering it's a brand new home. After about a week, they discover that the water is actually the liquefied remains of a decomposing body. In downtown Los Angeles, guests of the Cecil Hotel discovered that their water smelled and tasted funny. The pressure was weak, and the water would be black for a few seconds before returning back to normal. The guests continued to use the water normally. After about a week of more complaints, a maintenance worker was sent in to investigate. In one of the 4 large metal towers on the roof, the maintenance worker made a gruesome discovery: the body of a young woman lying at the bottom of the tank. The body was soon identified as that of 21-year-old Elisa Lam, a Canadian student who had been missing for 3 weeks. Elisa was last seen acting very strangely on an elevator security footage. The circumstances around her death are not completely known, but was ruled as a very strange accident. The Cecil Hotel has a history of unfortunate events occurring within the building, such as a woman from the 60s jumping out the window, and a serial killer known as the Night Stalker staying on the 14th floor and killing 14 people during the 80s.
Dog Boy. The story of Dog Boy is about a little kid who would spend his time experimenting and torturing local cats and dogs. Different sources say the boy had paranormal power. In 1954, Gerald Floyd Bettis grew up in the house now known as the Bettis House. Those who knew him claim to have witnessed him bringing home stray cats and lost dogs. However, his intentions were much more sinister than what people thought. Gerald would torture the animals to death. When he got older, he imprisoned his parents in the attic for supposedly up to 3 years. According to police reports, Gerald abused his parents badly, to the point of his father dying from it. Gerald eventually was arrested after the death of his father, and ended up dead due to a drug overdose in prison.
The Collector. Horror movies have profited off the urban legend that your creepy next-door neighbor has a secret collection stashed away in his basement. Maybe it's a few body parts, maybe it's a few bodies. Nevertheless, your neighbor is just up to something. In Russia, a man named Anatoly Moskvin had an apartment filled with his collection of human-sized dolls. This was because Anatoly had an obsession with stealing corpses from dozens of cemeteries in Moscow. he would dress them up in women's clothing and wigs to decorate his house. Grainy photos and video footage showed that Anatoly's apartment was crammed with dolls, up to 29 bodies, according to the police.
The Body Farm. Many urban legends detail certain areas of land being riddled with corpses and human body parts. Some believe these bodies were to be sacrificed, while others say the land was a dumping ground for serial killers. There are 3 body farms in the United States, one in Knoxville, Tennessee, San Marcos, Texas, and Cullowhee, North Carolina. The Knoxville Body Farm being the most famous of the 3. Having 150 to 190 bodies at any given spot, they have been donated and purposefully put there to help forensic experts better understand decomposition.
You're not alone. A man who lives alone cannot shake off the feeling of being constantly watched by something in his home. As it turns out, a girl has been living in his attic this whole time. Something similar actually took place in Fukuoka, Japan, when a man who did live in his apartment alone started noticing his belongings were being misplaced and that his food was being eaten. Paranoid, he decided to set up cameras around his house to try and find a cause for these strange occurrences. What he ended up seeing was a 58-year-old woman creeping out of his cupboard to steal food. The woman was homeless and admitted to police to living there for over a year.
The PCP cannibal. People have often debated about whether the side effects of drugs that have been told are true or not. One that is often told, especially on TV, is that PCP will turn users into flesh-eating cannibals. But is this true? The most infamous story of this actually happening involves a man named Antron Singleton, a rapper better known by his stage name as Big Lurch. After taking PCP for a week, police found Antron naked and covered in blood on the streets of Los Angeles. When investigating his apartment, police also found the body of Antron's 21-year-old roommate. Her chest was torn open and teeth marks were found on her face and on her lungs. A medical examination showed human flesh in Antron's stomach that wasn't his own. A similar event occurred in 2009 when a father who was under the influence of PCP ate the eyes of his own son and axed off his legs.
Shrunken heads. This legend explains that tribes would shrink the heads of their members for ceremonial rituals and sacrifices. There's even a museum in St. Augustine, Florida. But are they real? And is it possible for human heads to be intentionally shrunken? Headhunting really exists and has occurred in many regions of the world, particularly the Amazon rainforest. Shrinking heads was a rare practice even among the tribes that attempted them. However, it soon became a big business. The process of shrinking heads goes something like this. Make a cut on the back of the head. Peel all the skin and flesh from the skull. Sew the eyes and mouth shut. Boil the flesh, dry it with hot rocks, then mold it back into a head-like shape.
The Bunny Man. In 1904, the residents of Clifton, Virginia, successfully petitioned to have mental asylums and prisons shut down. The prisoners that were kept within were to be transported to another facility. During the transportation process, a few prisoners managed to escape. All of the escapees were captured soon after, except for 2 named Douglas and Marcus. In the woods, the police found a trail of mutilated, half-eaten rabbits that led them to a tunnel bridge crossing a wide creek. There, they found more rabbit corpses dangling on trees, and Marcus hanging from the tunnel entrance with a note that said, "You'll never find me no matter how hard you try. Signed, the Bunny Man." That tunnel has since been called the Bunny Man Bridge. Legend says that if you walk all the way down the tunnel at midnight, the Bunny Man will grab you and hang you from the entrance of the bridge. There are different variations of this story. Some say the Bunny Man carries an axe for a weapon. Others say he only comes out during Halloween nights to frighten wandering children. Nevertheless, there has been strange deaths connected with the Bunny Man Bridge. A young man who came upon the bridge ended up killing his parents and dragging their bodies into the woods to hang them from the bridge before killing himself. In 1943, 3 teenagers were at the Bunny Man Bridge during a Halloween night. They were later found dead, dangling from the bridge with their bodies slashed open. All 3 of them had notes attached to their feet saying, "You'll never catch the Bunny Man." In 2001, 6 local students explored the area after learning about the legend. They found mutilated bunny parts during their search, and left the forest after they reportedly heard noises and saw something moving around in the woods.
Brain maggots. This urban legend scared tourists of travelling to third world countries, as it details those returning with maggots or other insects rooted in their skulls. The freely roaming insects would sneak into your body while you were sleeping and even lay eggs. As it turns out, a woman named Rochelle Harris began hearing scratching noises in her head after returning from her trip to Peru. She wasn't worried much at first, until the noises became louder. She started to get headaches and often woke up with strange fluids on her pillow. Eventually, a fly flew out of her ear. Concerned, she finally went to the doctor and discovered a family of 8 large maggots were living deep within her ear canal. Doctors tried to get the maggots out, but the more medics delved into her ear, the more the larvae retreated into Rochelle's head. Concerned over the possibility of the maggots migrating through Rochelle's head, doctors were able to drown out the parasites by flooding the ear canal with olive oil.
The Cropsey. The Cropsey is an escaped mental patient who lives in the old abandoned Willowbrook Mental Institution in Staten Island, New York. The legend goes that the Cropsey would come out late at night and kidnap children off the streets. Some say the Cropsey had a hook for a hand, others say he wielded a giant bloody axe as a weapon. Nonetheless, the Cropsey urban legend urged children and teenagers not to wander late out at night, and to stay away from abandoned mental institutions. In 1987, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome disappeared from her home in Staten Island, New York. A documentary was produced detailing the disappearance of the girl, along with 4 other missing children and the legend of the Cropsey. Police began to suspect that a man named Andre Rand was behind all the disappearances. Andre was a former Willowbrook employee who has since lived out in the woods. Though he was never officially charged, Rand is currently serving 50 years to life for kidnapping and first-degree murder.
The Green Man. The Green Man, or Charlie No-Face, is an urban legend based on a green glowing supernatural entity or demon that wanders the roads of Pennsylvania at night. This man is horribly disfigured, smokes cigarettes as he puffs them through holes in his cheeks, and often resides in an abandoned tunnel called the Green Man Tunnel. The Green Man's real name was Raymond Robinson. When Ray was 9 years old, his friends dared him to climb a girder to reach a bird's nest. The girder was carrying some wires with 22,000 volts of electricity, which Ray touched, causing him to fall and suffer severe burns on his face and body. Ray's left arm was amputated, his nose and eyes were lost, and his mouth was bloated and twisted. He didn't sleep much, so Ray would wear his favorite green shirt and take walks during the late nights using a walking stick. His appearance alarmed locals and scared children back home, thus creating the urban legend of the Green Man.
The human vampires, also known as the human grease murderers, this Peruvian legend centers around a crime that happened 400 years ago. Locals spoke of shadowy figures who would stalk peasants or even tourists, kill them, then drain them of their fat and leave their bodies to rot. Recently, Peruvian police officers arrested a gang who have been partaking in grisly activities. The gang was caught having a pile of human ribs and thigh bones, a decomposing human head, and 2 Coke bottles filled with what appeared to be human fat. The members were human traffickers who would kill people and sell their fat to the black market. The leader of the gang has been reportedly doing this since the 1980s and has killed about 60 Peruvians for $15,000 per bottle of fat. The gang members themselves claim to have been selling it as an anti-aging cream or to shamans for satanic rituals. The official story was questioned for 2 reasons. 1. Why would a market for human fat even exist in the first place? And why did these men only care for the fat and not the organs, which could possibly make them more money? It's currently like 1 in the morning, but thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and favorite. And Japanese and Mexican American urban legends are coming soon, so stay tuned for that.
Number 15, The Prejudice of Roald Dahl. Get ready everyone, because we're about to reveal something about a most beloved children's author. Roald Dahl is world famous for his child-friendly and mildly unconventional stories for underage crowds. He has written famous books such as The BFG, James and the Giant Peach, and most famous of all, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Despite being an important children's author, Dahl also had personal views we today would find revolting. Dahl sparked controversy in 1983 after he told a journalist he held sympathies towards the Axis powers. He stated Germany had a reason for taking the lives of 6 million Jewish people shortly before his passing in 1990. He denounced Israel and made several horrible remarks. It should also be noted several of Dahl's books portray certain cultures in an unflattering light. For example, it is often overlooked the Oompa Loompas in the book version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory are from Africa, which can become uncomfortable knowing how they have willingly become subservients of a rich entrepreneur, doing his will upon request. This led to the film adaptation changing the Oompa Loompas into orange-faced and green-haired short people instead, in order to steer away from this controversy. Number 14, The True Disney Tales. Disney has adapted many fairy tales for the big screen, starting with Snow White in 1937. This is a trend that has continued today, adapting others from Cinderella, Pocahontas, etc. Of course, the Disney Corporation needed to make major rewrites in order to make the stories child-friendly and with happy endings. Much of the stories adapted were from the famous Brothers Grimm tales, which are indeed grim in detail. For example, the original Snow White has the prince taking advantage of Snow White's deep sleep by sleeping with her and even having several children with her before she even wakes. In Cinderella, the executives thought it was best to omit the fact the stepsisters removed their toes in order for their feet to fit the glass slipper. Furthermore, the story of Pocahontas is drastically rewritten. In real life, Pocahontas was forcefully brought back to Britain in order for Rolfe to present the royalty the idea of the civilized savage, thus gaining royal investment in Jamestown, Virginia. She passed away at age 21, never returning home. The list is endless, but it is fair to say Disney had good reason for changing the story in order to make family-friendly films. Number 13. The Fall of Anakin. It's no secret people were severely disappointed with the Star Wars prequel trilogy, whether it be due to the storyline or the acting, or Jar Jar. People have found something to complain about. The Phantom Menace has by far suffered the most criticism for not meeting expectations and relying too highly on computer effects. Young actor Jake Lloyd starred as the young Anakin Skywalker, the boy who would go on to become Darth Vader. What should have been a breakout role turned out to be a nightmare. After Lloyd suffered harsh criticism and bullying due to his participation in the film, this proved to be too much, and Lloyd decided to retire from acting in 2001 since the bullying from his classmates had become unbearable. He continued to make appearances at conventions, but told a reporter he did everything he could to prevent himself from being recognized on the street. Due to the backlash, things took a rather sad turn when Lloyd was taken into custody in 2015 for reckless driving and resisting arrest. A year into his sentence, Lloyd was transferred to a psychiatric facility. Lloyd's mother also confirmed he was very aggressive towards her during an episode when he fell off his meds. However, when speaking to media about his transfer, she has reported Lloyd's mental health has improved significantly as a result of treatment, and the two maintain a close relationship. Lloyd's ordeal shows how difficult an actor's life can be away from the cameras, as everyone suffers from their own demons. Number 12. The Struggle of the Blue Ranger. Power Rangers was one of the major franchises during the 90s. While dated today, the show still holds nostalgic value with people, and its campy 90s style still captured people's hearts. One particular favorite was actor David Yost, who played Billy Cranston or the Blue Ranger between 1993 and 1996. Initially, he stated he left the role due to a pay dispute, but in 2010, he came clean to the actual reason he left the series. Yost claims he was subject to ridicule because he was gay, which was still seen as taboo back in the early to mid-90s. Yost stated he was constantly called names on set to his face, and production crew would constantly question the other cast members if they were concerned about David. The torment led him into a deep depression and contemplation of taking his own life, which eventually made him decide to leave the show late into the 4th season. Horrified from the ordeal, he attempted conversion therapy, but this only resulted in a mental breakdown in psychiatric care. After a trip to Mexico, he came to terms with and accepted his orientation. The writers during Yost's tenure on the show have maintained Yost left due to insignificant pay, but have refused to elaborate further. It's sad to discover when a production sees conflict over such issues, especially when the tormentors resort to childish behavior. Number 11. Pee-wee Gets Busted. Pee-wee Herman is a popular character created and performed by Paul Rubens since 1977. Pee-wee was also the main character in several on-screen portrayals, famously Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985 and the children's television show Pee-wee's Playhouse between 1986 and 1991. Things took a drastic turn when Rubens was arrested in 1991. Detectives visiting a theater spotted Rubens conducting an act considered indecent exposure. Rubens and Pee-wee became subject of ridicule from the public, and reruns of Pee-wee's Playhouse were cancelled in wake of the scandal. However, Rubens managed to maintain a large amount of support from fellow celebrities and fans. By the time of the 1991 MTV Music Awards, Rubens appeared on stage as Pee-wee, sending the audience into a roar of applause and cheers. For the remaining decade, the scandal died down until Rubens was back in the police spotlight in 2002. Rubens pled guilty to a charge by police and was forced to register as an offender for a short time. Since then, Rubens has kept a mildly low profile, conducting voice acting in cartoons and video games. Number 10. Products of their time. It's common for people to go back and watch the films and TV shows from their childhood. It doesn't matter how young the target audience, adults can have a flood of nostalgia upon watching one of their favorite children's shows. However, as we grow up and mature, we can start seeing various adult-orientated jokes and caricatures far beyond the realm of political correctness. Cartoons from the 40s through the 70s and even 80s have depicted stereotypes of many different groups. A great example is from the Tom and Jerry cartoons, with the character Mammy Two Shoes. In every way, shape, and form, Mammy Two Shoes is made up of stereotypes. For one, she is a housemaid in a wealthy home, and secondly, she speaks in greatly exaggerated lingo. She was written out of the cartoons after 1952's push-button Kitty. MGM Studios even created a censored version of the shorts featuring her, replacing her with a different woman instead. However, the release of Tom and Jerry on Netflix maintains Mammy Two Shoes as she was, with a disclaimer at the beginning of certain episodes, warning of the stereotypes portrayed in the films, and also defending their decision to keep them, by explaining by removing them would deny such prejudices exist. Warner Brothers also didn't steer clear of stereotyping, especially during the 1940s. In several Bugs Bunny cartoons, Japanese are portrayed as buck-toothed simpletons, which is enough to make any person cringe. These cartoons come to show how different attitudes were back then, and how it was acceptable to portray such stereotypes, with how much things have changed in the latter half of the 20th century. There is no way such portrayals would even get to the drawing board today. Number 9. Ferris Bueller's Dark Knight. The 1980s saw a cultural phenomenon with the release of several teen comedies. Arguably the most beloved of them is 1986's Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Star Matthew Broderick became an overnight sensation, and the film continues to have massive popularity today. However, Broderick has a dark secret not so many people know about. On August 5th, 1987, Broderick was driving through Northern Ireland with Ferris Bueller co-star and then girlfriend Jennifer Grey when he crossed into the opposite lane. Authorities in Northern Ireland brought charges and he was facing 5 years locked up. However, he made a plea deal to a lesser charge of careless driving and only had to pay a $175 fine. This immediately caused outcry in Northern Ireland, especially from family member Martin. He called Broderick's verdict a travesty of justice. While Broderick certainly under no circumstances meant to cause this to happen, it is hard to not understand Martin's pain over the slap on the wrist punishment. Martin later came to terms with the event and forgave Broderick, and the two even planned to meet in 2003. However, as of this video, the meeting hasn't taken place. Number 8. The Monster of the BBC. In the United Kingdom, Top of the Pops was a phenomenon for its run from 1964 to 2006. Of all the presenters the show had, none was as famous as Jimmy Savile. For 20 years, the eccentric man hosted alongside several people until he finally retired from the role in 1984. Jimmy was known for his sense of humor and bizarre behavior. He was also active in charity, running several marathons and collecting donations for children's hospitals across the country. When he passed away in 2011, fans from around the world flocked to give their respect to the late host. However, not long after his passing, tons of allegations flooded police and media. There were reports during his lifetime, but these were widely dismissed due to lack of evidence. Now, there were hundreds of accusations against him, and mounting evidence of a cover-up conducted by the BBC and others. The Metropolitan Police Service launched an official investigation the year following his passing and came to the frightening number of 589 allegations of his frightening actions. It was also found that he used his high status in the BBC to aid him in finding new people, with members of the BBC shutting down any accusations against him. These people even included children and teens recovering in hospitals he had funded. Jimmy had gone from eccentric Superman to the most prolific serial offenders in British history in a very short amount of time. Number 7. Flipper. At a simple glance, dolphins look like the happiest animals on Earth. Not only do they naturally have a grin, but they also appear to have fun jumping out of the water and playing with bubble rings. Sadly, dolphins in captivity are known to suffer greatly. Richard O'Barry is a former dolphin trainer turned activist who helped capture and train the 5 dolphins who portrayed Flipper in the original 1960s television series. O'Barry became fond of his dolphins, in particular one named Kathy. He knew she wasn't happy and was suffering in captivity, but he did his best to take care of her. According to O'Barry, he was comforting her one day when she took a breath and never took another one. Surprised, O'Barry eventually let her go and she sank to the bottom of the tank, never to resurface. To this day, O'Barry is certain Kathy took her own life, tired of being away from the sea. Unlike humans and other animals, dolphins are conscious air breathers, meaning every breath they make requires conscious effort. Therefore, it appears Kathy purposefully did not take another breath, knowing the consequences of doing so. The experience greatly affected O'Barry, and he turned his back on the profession and turned to activism in preserving the global dolphin population. Number 6. Jeffrey Jones' dirty hard drive. Most can be forgiven for not knowing who Jeffrey Jones is simply by name, but the moment you see his photo, it's guaranteed many of you will know who he is. He is probably best known for playing the principal Edward Mooney in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, as well as Charles Dietz in Beetlejuice. In 2002, Jones fell headfirst into hot water when it was discovered Jones had a collection of photos involving children and had attempted to solicit photos from a 14-year-old boy. He was taken into custody and pled no contest. He received 5 years probation, mandatory counseling, and had to register as an offender. 2 years after this happened, Jones was locked up for failing to register his offender status in Florida, and again in 2010 in California for the same reason. Since then, Jones has kept a low profile and appears to be following the conditions of his sentence. He has also made public appearances without incident, signing autographs, and even appearing with co-star Winona Ryder during a 2011 Tim Burton exhibit. Number 5. Judy from Family Matters. This popular family sitcom lasting 9 years and 9 seasons between 1989 and 1998. Even those who weren't fans of the show will know the character Steve Urkel, the nerdy neighbor of the Winslow family. The character of Judy Winslow lasted 4 seasons and was played by Jamie Foxworth. However, at the end of the show's 4th season, the production's budget was cut, leaving the writers and crew with major decisions to make. Having decided Judy made little contribution to the show, she was written out, with Foxworth being let go from the series. To add insult to injury, the further seasons never explained her sudden departure, and instead moved on as if she never existed at all. Foxworth found the search for acting work difficult, and she was unable to find a steady job. As a way to find work, she began taking jobs in the adult movie industry under the name Crave. She worked in that industry for a couple years before leaving, and it wasn't public knowledge until 2000. Afterwards, she spiraled into depression. She later appeared on Celebrity Rehab in 2008, and became fully committed to going clean after finding out she was pregnant. Today, she is completely clean and a devoted mother to her son. She is working on her memoirs describing her struggles, and it appears she is now in a good place. Number 4. The Not So Wonderful Oz. If there is an example of a timeless classic, The Wizard of Oz is definitely a frontrunner. However, despite the bright world portrayed, the set was a completely different story. In short, production was a nightmare and went through 2 directors in a matter of weeks. Furthermore, the Munchkin cast were treated rather poorly, especially in terms of pay. In the 1989 book, The Munchkins of Oz, author Stephen Cox reveals the Munchkins' pay was $50 per week, which today equates to $900. Meanwhile, Toto and her handler earned upwards of $125 per week, which is about $2,100 today. Imagine being told you were being paid less than a dog for your work. However, on the other side, ex-husband of the late Judy Garland claimed in his memoir, the actors who played the Munchkins made Garland's life miserable. Of course, there is also the famous urban legend of a Munchkin seen hanging in one of the scenes, but this has been denied by the surviving cast and crew. For such a child-friendly film, it's horrible to hear about the alleged happenings that went on around set. It comes to prove how difficult the production world is from the world in which the story takes place. Number 3. Humpty Dumpty's Fall. We all know the story. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. He had a fall. The king's horses and men's couldn't put him back together again. The rhyme has been around for centuries, and even portrayed in picture books and films. In both contemporary and modern depictions, Humpty Dumpty is an anthropomorphic egg, hence why he breaks so easily upon falling. He is also portrayed as such in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, where he educates Alice on the subject of semantics. Going a step further, Humpty Dumpty has been used by teachers and professors to explain the second law of thermodynamics. So what's the big surprise with this entry? Well, it will come as a surprise to tell you, in the original rhyme, Humpty Dumpty was not an Eggman. In fact, in real life it wasn't even a living thing at all. The truth is, there is evidence to suggest Humpty Dumpty was in fact a cannon. According to the Colchester Tourist Board, Humpty Dumpty was a large cannon which once rested on the walls of the Church of St. Mary at the Wall. As the story goes, parliamentarians damaged the wall beneath Humpty Dumpty during the siege of 1648, sending it plunging to the ground. Due to the weight of the cannon, the royalists were unable to lift it back up, and it was effectively out of commission. While not proven, the story does have merit. First off, the royalists supported the king, thus being depicted as all the king's men. Second, the rhyme never gives Humpty Dumpty a description, let alone identifying it as an Eggman, or even a human. This is an example of how things can change over time, as generation after generation interprets writings of all forms. Number 2. Those we've lost and sadly forgotten. It's hard to imagine there are stars out there we love, but we do not know their names, and worse, so we're unaware they passed away. The first example is of Judith Barcy, initially appearing in commercials. Barcy later appeared in television shows and films, including guest roles on Punky Brewster and Cheers. Her most famous role was the voice of Ducky in The Land Before Time, and Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. Sadly, her career was cut short. Barcy's father was a drinker and would become severely angry. After Barcy's mother began divorce proceedings against her husband, he reached his breaking point and took the lives of his wife and child before taking his own. The cast and crew of Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven were devastated, especially considering the fact Barcy was only 10 years old when it happened. Both films were released after her passing, and were both dedicated in her memory. The actor who portrayed the child Grinch in How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a double whammy. Surprisingly, at the time of his portrayal in the movie, he was 18 years old, but anyone would be forgiven for believing otherwise. Evans was born with dwarfism and only grew to 3 feet 2 inches tall. On August 5th, 2002, Evans was rushed to the hospital, suffering from complications related to a heart condition. During an operation to correct the problem, he passed away. Strangely, his character for the soap opera, Passions, passed away on the show the exact same day. The last one we will talk about is the Canadian children's show Caillou. The titular character was voiced by actress Jacqueline Linetsky from 2000 to 2003. Her time on the show was cut short after her and her mom lost control of their van and ran into a semi-truck. Both Linetsky and her mother passed instantly. She was only 17 years old. There are plenty more people we can discuss, but this should give you an idea of the things we are unaware of, even though these individuals were part of famous films from our childhood. Before we get to number 1, my name is Chills and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you're curious about what I look like in real life, then go to my Instagram at DylanIsChillinYT and tap that follow button to find out. I'm currently doing a super poll on my Instagram. If you believe ghosts are real, then go to my most recent photo and tap the like button. If you don't, DM me saying why. When you're done, come right back to this video to find out the number 1 entry. Also, follow me on Twitter at YTChills because that's where I post video updates. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person, so if you're generous enough to hit that subscribe button and the bell beside it, then thank you. This way you'll be notified of the new videos we upload every Tuesday and Saturday. Number 1. Walt Disney's facade. The man is truly a legend. Walt Disney created the most popular and beloved children's entertainment the world has ever seen. Today, the name Disney is synonymous with happiness and fun. Despite his achievement and innovation in animation, Disney can't be considered a saint. While not fully proven, there have been rumors surrounding him claiming he was prejudiced towards Jewish people, which is hard to counter considering he attended meetings of the German-American Bund. He also hosted German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, granting her a tour of Disneyland and the Disney Studios. Furthermore, it's hard to ignore the portrayals of ethnicities in his cartoons, specifically African Americans, and let's not get started on other ethnicities as we'll be here all day. Something particular that is hard for Disney supporters to deny or defend of Disney is his staunch views of women. Ward Kimball, an associate and friend of Disney, once said he didn't trust women or cats. The most damning evidence of Disney's unflattering view of women is a letter received by Mary Ford in 1938 after she applied for work at the Disney Studios. In short, it stated only young men work in the inking and painting department and no women are allowed to work there. Well, definitely a man of his time, as the saying goes. It is still horrible to see the sorts of views he had and allegedly had, considering he is the king of children's entertainment. However, he has long since passed, and his company has moved on, becoming more and more progressive as time goes on. Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe because we upload new countdowns every Tuesday and Saturday. Or if you're still not convinced, here are some of our other videos that I think you'd like. Enjoy!
Number 15. The Possession. This 2012 horror film is based on the haunted Diebuck box. In real life, the infamous Diebuck box was a wine cabinet, which was allegedly haunted by an evil spirit. Legend has it that the box belonged to Havela, a Holocaust survivor, who had bought it prior to immigrating to America. Kevin Manis, who wrote a story about the incident, had bought the box from Havela's family in an estate sale. Learning that it was a family heirloom, he wanted to return the box, but Havela's granddaughter said, "We don't want it," adding that a Diebuck haunted it. Inside the box, Manis discovered an odd array of items: 2 pennies from the 1920s, a wine goblet made of gold, a candle holder with 4 stems shaped like octopus legs, a single dried rosebud, a tiny statue with the word Shalom engraved in it, and 2 locks of hair, one blonde, one black, each bound separately with cords. The box has been owned by a number of individuals, and all have reported strange happenings occurring with its ownership. Many have said that a strong smell of jasmine flowers and cat urine emanate from the box, as well as nightmares that entail an old hag. Manis himself reported that when people would stay with him while he owned the box, several of his visitors shared the same nightmares, and when he passed it off to his mother as a birthday gift, she suffered a stroke. Other owners have claimed that they suffered health problems once they came into possession of the cursed box, including welts, coughing up blood, hair falling out, and hives. The last known owner bought the box off of eBay, and after speaking with rabbis about how to seal the evil spirit inside the box, he did so and hid the diebuck in an unmarked location. The film follows a similar plot, where a girl called M finds a strange wooden box engraved with Hebrew at a yard sale. Her father, Clyde, buys the box for her, and she starts to hear whispers coming from inside. Opening it, she discovers several odd items, including a dead moth and a ring. Once she starts wearing the ring, she begins acting strangely and violently, and odd things start to happen inside their home. The diebuck eventually possesses not just M, but Clyde too. Exorcisms are performed, but once the box is gotten rid of, it is still cursed, claiming the lives of many throughout the film. Before we go any further, do you enjoy scary movies? Let me know in the comments with a simple yes or no. My answer would be absolutely. Nothing better than a little self-induced fear. If you're feeling generous, please leave a like as it really helps us out. Number 14, Eaten Alive. Based on a real-life psychopath, Eaten Alive is inspired by Crazy Man Joe Ball, an American serial killer who may have fed up to 20 women to alligators in the 1930s. Ball served in the front lines in World War I before beginning his bootlegging career. Once Prohibition had ended, he continued his career in liquor by opening a saloon in Elmendorf, Texas. The Sociable Inn held a pond with 6 alligators. He charged extra from his customers to view the monsters during their feeding time. He allegedly fed the alligators mainly cats and dogs. It didn't take long for Ball to start murdering area women and adding them to the alligators' meals. Barmaids, ex-girlfriends, and even his wife. When the last went missing in 1938, sheriff's deputies came to interrogate him. Apparently, Ball knew the jig was up and didn't want to rot in prison, so he'd shot himself with a handgun he'd stashed away in the saloon's cash register. Clifford Wheeler, Ball's handyman, led officers to the decomposing bodies of 2 of the victims, Minnie Gothard and Hazel Brown. Clifford had helped Ball try to dispose of them. Wheeler claimed that Ball had killed 20 or more women, all of whom he'd fed to the alligators. The Alligator Man is now a thing of Texas folklore. Makes you wonder what else lurks in them there swamps. Number 13, The Rite. Yet another exorcism movie. The Rite is based on the life of one of America's most famous exorcists, Father Gary Thomas. The thriller follows experiences Thomas had when he was being trained as an exorcist. In the film, the son of a funeral home owner, Michael Kovac, helps to earn a free college degree by entering a seminary school and renouncing his vows once he's received his diploma. After Michael is ordained as a deacon, he resigns, claiming his faith is lacking. However, a chain of events leads Michael, still dressed in his clerical clothes, to give out the last rites to a fatally injured cyclist on the street. Upon absolving the girl of her sins, Michael returns to the church after Father Matthew convinces him to become an exorcist. He didn't take much convincing, being that he was told that the resignation might lead to the church turning his scholarship into a $100,000 student loan. He is then sent to the Vatican for exorcism classes with Father Xavier. Michael soon finds himself alongside another senior exorcist, Father Lucas, in the home of a pregnant young girl named Rosaria, who was raped by her father, resulting in her being possessed by evil. The possession causes the girl to speak fluent English and cough up 3 nails. Eventually, Rosaria tries to drown herself and, while hospitalized, Father Lucas performs another exorcism upon her. However, that night, Rosaria dies from blood loss after a miscarriage. It seems that the evil didn't go far. Father Lucas begins showing signs of demonic possession. He himself knows that he is possessed and asks Michael to find Father Xavier to perform an exorcism on him. Unable to contact him, Michael successfully performs the exorcism himself. This experience returns Michael's lost faith to him, and he stays with the priesthood. All of this based upon the real-life experiences of Father Gary Thomas. Number 12. The Zodiac Killer. Most people have heard of the Zodiac Killer. This infamous serial killer committed the murders of 3 men and 4 women in San Francisco from December of 1968 to October of 1969. The 1971 film is loosely based on these events, though it names the killer, provides him a backstory, and fictionalizes the investigation. In the film, the Zodiac Killer is a postal carrier. His friend is falsely named the Zodiac Killer after a series of events leads him to claim to be the murderer, and he is shot dead by police. This is when the real Zodiac Killer starts taunting the police and adding to his body count by killing several random people, as well as people he knows, who start to mock his alter ego or are not nice to him personally. The film creates a motive for his crime spree through the man's unhappy relationship with his father. The real-life Zodiac Killer is a mystery to this day. His attacks included gunning down 2 high school lovers on their first date, shooting another couple near the site of the first murder, although the man survived the shooting, stabbing another couple, again, the male victim survived, and shooting a cabbie dead. Several more attacks have been attributed to the Zodiac Killer, including the kidnapping of a pregnant woman and her child. They managed to escape, and the stabbing of a young woman who was studying in the library. As depicted in the film, the Zodiac Killer truly did taunt the police, sending letters that termed himself the Zodiac, along with 4 cryptograms, only one of which has been solved. The solved cipher reads, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It's even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and those I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name, because you will try to slow me down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. Ibiori Timeth Piti." Some believe that the killer must have been involved in law enforcement at some point, because there was an utter lack of evidence each time he killed. Although suspects were named, the evidence was never conclusive for a conviction. The high-profile, unsolved case was eventually closed, but as new technologies began to advance, the case was reopened in 2007. However, no new leads were drawn. Number 11. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is based on a series of real-life exorcisms performed on a young German woman, Anneliese Michel, which eventually led to her death. Anneliese had an epileptic seizure at 16 and was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. She also suffered from depression and was sent to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. This is where she started hearing voices and couldn't stand to be around religious objects like the crucifix. By the age of 20, she claimed she saw devil faces and began having other spiritual delusions, including hallucinating voices that would tell her to rot in hell and condemn her while she was praying. Soon, she became suicidal and, believing demons possessed their daughter, Michel's parents sought help from a Catholic priest. At first, the priests refused, citing the need for a bishop's permission to perform an exorcism, but Michel's condition worsened. She became more aggressive started to eat insects, drank her own urine, and injured herself. In the end, 2 local priests sought permission from the bishop, and over a 10-month period, they performed exorcism rites on the young woman. Priest Arnold Renz performed the first exorcism in 1975, after which Mikhail's parents ceased any and all medical treatment, relying solely on the exorcism to improve her condition. 67 sessions were performed, some lasting up to 4 hours. Mikhail didn't improve, saying her condition was a sacrifice, and claiming she was dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. As she weakened, she refused to eat or drink, and on the 1st of July 1976, she died from dehydration and malnutrition, weighing 68 pounds on her deathbed. Her autopsy showed that she had broken knees, resulting from her rigorous genuflections. She'd contracted pneumonia, and she'd been in a state of semi-starvation for the year the exorcism was performed. Her exorcism became infamous. The rarely used 400-year-old rites of exorcism caught the eye of the media and the public and was strongly denounced. The Catholic Church had all but done away with exorcism since the 18th century. The priests involved were found guilty of negligent homicide, as were Mikhail's parents. They served a 3-year probation sentence and paid a fine, but the case was highly charged as negligence and abuse, while also bringing religious hysteria and mental disorder to the fore. Number 10. The Strangers. The Strangers is a combination of real-life events and inspiration from the serial killer Charles Manson. The director of the film, Brian Bertino, drew from his own childhood. One night, a stranger knocked at his door, asked if someone was home, and then walked away when he was told that this person didn't live there. But Bertino later discovered that someone had broken into a number of homes in the neighborhood that night. The movie mirrors this. In it, at 4 in the morning, a stranger knocks at the door of a summer home where a couple is staying. The woman asks for someone who isn't there, and then leaves. James, the man in the coupling, heads out for a bit, and the woman, Kristen, hears odd sounds coming from outside. She finds a man in a sack mask watching her from the backyard, and she hides from him until her boyfriend returns. Kristen tells James what happened, after which he finds his car has been burglarized, and the woman who had knocked earlier is watching him from a distance wearing a doll mask. Through a series of events, James and Kristen eventually find themselves captured by the masked strangers, tied to chairs in their living room. "Why are you doing this?" Kristen asks the strangers. The woman responds, "Because you were home." The couple is then stabbed repeatedly by the strangers, and the movie ends with 2 young boys discovering their bodies. Bertino, the film's director, cites Helter Skelter, a true crime book about the Manson family murders, as a primary source of inspiration. Manson is known to have led a sort of cult commune in California in the late 60s, in which he preached Helter Skelter, a term taken from a song by the Beatles. Manson thought it meant an apocalyptic race war was approaching, and he thought murdering people would help begin the war. In the summer of '69, the Manson family murdered 9 people, according to Charles Manson's instructions. Number 9. The Haunting in Connecticut. Loosely based on real events that took place, this 2009 American psychological horror film is said to be about Carmen Snedeker and her family who lived in Southington, Connecticut in 1986. Famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren said that the Snedeker home served formerly as a funeral home. The morticians who worked there, the Warrens claimed, had committed necrophilia with the corpses. An exorcism was performed in order to rid the strong supernatural forces that had found a home there. Catholic exorcists were brought in to perform an exorcism. A wax effigy of the Virgin Mary used in the exorcism is now on display in the Zaffis Museum of the Paranormal. The statue was disfigured during the rites. In the film, A similar supernatural force haunts the house of the Campbells. The Campbells had rented out a home that was closer to the hospital, as one of the film's characters, Matthew, had cancer. Matt moves into the basement and finds a strange door there. He soon starts to have creepy visions involving corpses and a bearded man. Peter discovers that the house used to be a funeral home, and the strange door was the entrance to the mortuary. Matt's visions began to become more traumatic and his behavior strange. At one point, the family finds he's scratched at a wall until his fingers are bloody. The family starts to dig into the strange visions and behavior. They discovered that a man called Ramsey Aikman used to run the funeral home and would conduct seances with a young man named Jonah, who Matt had envisioned. One of the seances led to multiple deaths, including that of Aikman, after which Jonah vanished. Though many believe Jonah's spirit to be the evil one, in the end it turns out that Jonah was actually protecting them from the evil spirits, corpses, that Aikman had hid in the walls of the house. Jonah had been cremated alive by them during the seance. When the family discovers this, they remove the corpses from the walls, and Matt lights them and the room on fire. Luckily, Matt survives the fire and his cancer, and once the corpses are freed, the evil leaves the house as well. Although, it will likely hang about you long after the movie is over. Number 8. The Girl Next Door. In 1965, a truly evil crime unfolded in the state of Indiana. The Girl Next Door is loosely based on this crime. What occurred in Indianapolis at the hands of Gertrude Benetsuski, her children, and some other neighborhood kids can only be described as torture. For $20 per week, Benetsuski had been entrusted to take care of a 16-year-old girl, Sylvia Likens, along with her sister Jenny. Sylvia's parents were carnival workers, and her father, Lester, boarded the two sisters with Benetsuski when their mother was put in jail for shoplifting. He asked Benetsuski to straighten his daughters out. Benetsuski straightened them out by beating them with paddles when she felt stressed or depressed. For some reason, she began zeroing in specifically on Sylvia, emotionally and physically abusing her, and encouraging her children to do so as well. The older children started beating her, pushing her down flights of stairs, and even kicking her in the genitals. Benetsuski called Sylvia a prostitute and would rant about how filthy she was. Soon, Stephanie Benetsuski's boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, became involved in the physical abuse, along with the pair's peers. They were, again, encouraged by Benetsuski to beat and torture her, tie her up, put out lit cigarettes on her, burn her with boiling water, make her eat feces, put salt in her open wounds, and sexually assault her. The Likens girls tried to contact their parents and family members for help, but their letters went unanswered. Their older sister thought they were exaggerating and just wanted to get out of their situation. She did, however, visit the Benetsuski home and contacted social services when she'd learned from Gertrude that Sylvia had supposedly run away. The Likens' parents completely ignored their cries for help. Eventually, Benetsuski would not allow the Likens to go to school, locked her in the basement, made her bathe in scalding water, rubbed salt in her wounds, and deprived her of drinking water to the point that she was dehydrated. Benetsuski took a burning hot needle and scratched into Sylvia's abdomen. "I am a prostitute, and proud of it." She then forced her to write a note to her parents, indicating that she had run away. Her plan was to have her children dump her withered body in a nearby forest to die. Sylvia tried to run away before they were able to achieve this, but she was caught and locked back in the basement where she was again tortured and died the next day of malnutrition, shock, and a brain hemorrhage at the age of 16. Stephanie Benetsuski realized she was not breathing and asked Richard Hobbs to call the police. Gertrude gave the police the runaway letter she'd forced Sylvia to write. She told the police that Sylvia had agreed to prostitute herself to a group of boys, but the boys had taken her and tortured her. However, Jenny Likens asked to speak to the police in confidence before they left the house. They found Sylvia's body and, along with Jenny's statement, brought the Benetsuski's family and those neighborhood youths who were involved in the despicable torture and murder of Sylvia to trial. Gertrude and her daughter, Paula, were sentenced to life in prison. The neighborhood boys involved and John Benetsuski were convicted of manslaughter. The prosecutor described the case as the most terrible crime ever committed in the state of Indiana. Number 7. Child's Play. Believe it or not, the infamous Chucky doll is based on a true story. Author and painter Robert Eugene Otto claims that his nurse put a voodoo curse on one of his dolls, and the script of Child's Play is based on this haunted doll. The real cursed doll, also known as Robert the Enchanted Doll or Robert the Haunted Doll, is at the center of ghost tours in the Key West region. Robert has woolen or yarn hair and is dressed like an American sailor from the early 1900s. Although Chucky doesn't at all resemble Robert, he is certainly equally as creepy. Child's Play is the first installment in the series of slasher films in which a mother gifts her son a doll which is possessed by the soul of a famed Chicago serial killer. The man's evil soul enters the doll after he is killed in a shootout with homicide detective Mike Norris in a toy shop. When the doll is gifted to the boy, Andy, the boy's babysitter is killed that night. She falls out a window after being slammed in the face with a hammer, and Andy is suspected by the police. The next day, he is ordered by Chucky to go downtown because the serial killer wants to pay a visit to Eddie, one of the serial killer's friends who abandoned him. The doll turns up the gas on the stove and messes with Eddie until he takes a shot at the stove, causing an explosion. Andy is, again, suspected of the murder and is put into a mental hospital. Through a series of events, Chucky discovers that he must escape the doll's body and possess the first person who was told about him, Andy, while Mike and Andy's mother discover that the serial killer's soul can be destroyed via a fatal injury to the heart. After a lot of violence and many false death scenes, Mike finally shoots Chucky in the heart, killing the soul of the killer. Or so we're led to believe, until the next installment comes out. Number 6. The Conjuring. Paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren are the witnesses of the real-life haunting that inspired The Conjuring. In the film, the Warrens themselves are represented responding to the Perron family in 1971 Rhode Island. The family made claims about strange and volatile events occurring in their farmhouse, and the real-life Warrens say the case was one of the most difficult to address. In the film adaptation, the Perrons move into the farmhouse with their 5 daughters and their dog, who won't enter the home, perhaps suspecting what horrors await the family inside. One of the kids finds a cellar entrance that's boarded up, and within a few days, a series of hauntings occur. The family dog is found dead. One of the daughters, Christine, feels an evil spirit pulling on her leg, and another of the girls, Carolyn, hears strange clapping in the hall. She follows the noises to see where they're coming from and ends up in the basement, where the spirit traps her. Simultaneously, 2 of the other girls are ambushed by another evil spirit living above the wardrobe. This is when the Warrens are called in for their expertise. Upon examination, the Warrens recommend an exorcism of the farmhouse. They must dig a little deeper and seek permission from the Catholic Church to go ahead with the exorcism. What they find is deeply disturbing. The history of the house's former occupant explains why evil resides here. An alleged witch, named Bathsheba, had sacrificed her baby to the devil. The baby had only been a week old. She then placed a curse on her land and those who would later reside there, after which she killed herself. Ever since that day in 1863, a number of murders and suicides had taken place on the property. After further investigation, including installing bells and cameras throughout the house, the Perron family decides to stay in a hotel while the Warrens appeal to the church for an exorcist. But while they're waiting, it is discovered that Carolyn has been possessed by Bathsheba and attempts to kill Christine. Ed Warren decides to try to perform the exorcism, as there's no time to wait for a priest. He is attacked by Bathsheba during an attempted exorcism. While Ed is incapacitated, Carolyn tries to kill April as well, but is distracted by Lorraine until the exorcism has been successfully performed, ridding of Bathsheba and her curse forever. Number 5. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If gruesome scary movie murders with chainsaws don't scare you enough, then perhaps knowing that some of the facts of this tale are based on true events might at least make your skin crawl. The concept for the 1974 horror film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is inspired by the real-life murderer, Ed Gein. Some minor plot details were based on his crimes, and the main villain, Leatherface, is reimagined from Ed Gein's tendency to tan the skin of his victims and use it as clothing. Ed Gein was a murderer and body snatcher who wreaked havoc in and around Plainfield, Wisconsin in the mid to late 1950s. He was found to have exhumed bodies from area cemeteries in order to build himself seriously creepy trophies from the skin and bones of the dead. He also confessed to murdering 2 women. Although he was diagnosed as legally insane, he was found guilty in 1968 for killing Bernice Warden, a hardware store owner. When his beloved mother died, Gein lived on the family farm by himself. Completely alone in the world and quite mentally disturbed already, he began to read death cult magazines, specifically ones that included cannibalism. When Gein was finally suspected of murdering Warden, having been the last customer to visit the store before she disappeared, investigators searched his property and found Warden's body hanging upside down in his shed. Gein had shot her, decapitated her, and dressed out her torso like a deer. Investigators searched the rest of Gein's house and made numerous blood-curdling discoveries, including skulls on his bedposts and items made out of human skulls and human skin, including bowls, chair seats, a lampshade, and a wastebasket. Additionally, he'd made clothing items out of human skin, including a corset, leggings, a belt, and face masks. The movie took some of these details under consideration when creating their character, Leatherface, who picked off characters in the movie, one by one, in order to feed them to his cannibal family. His home, also a farmhouse like Gein's, is full of furniture made from human bones. Although these gory real-life details are dramatized in the film, this is one case where the dramatization of cinema pales in comparison to the gruesome nature of true events. Number 4. The Exorcist. The Catholic Church performed an exorcism on a 14-year-old American boy in the late 40s. The boy's pseudonym in records that documented this exorcism was Roland Doe, and Raymond Bishop was the acting priest who alleged that Roland was possessed by a demon. The famous film The Exorcist is based on these real-life events. Roland didn't have many friends as a child, and his adult family members were those he most often played with. His Aunt Harriet particularly influenced him, pulling out the Ouija board whenever Roland wanted. When Aunt Harriet died, it's alleged that strange things started to happen. Regular objects started levitating and flying across the room around the boy. Furniture moved on its own, and strange noises were heard throughout the home. The family was Lutheran, and they asked their pastor for help. After observing the boy in his own home, Pastor Luther Schultz advised that the family seek help from a Catholic priest. During the boy's first exorcism, which took place at Georgetown University Hospital, Roland managed to pull one of his hands from the restraints that held him to the bed and wrench a bed spring from below the mattress, which he used to stab the priest's arm. The boy was further observed to speak in a guttural voice and bow away from any sacred item. Being that the first exorcism was cut short, literally, a second exorcism was performed on Roland, with a series of odd happenings occurring during the rite, including symbols and the words hell and evil appearing on the child's body. The bed also shook vigorously, and Roland ended up breaking Father Walter H. Halloran's nose. An author who investigated the incident, Thomas Allen, said that there was no definitive proof that the subject was possessed. He may, instead, have been suffering from mental illness or abuse, or he may have made up the entire thing. Before his death, Halloran made a statement that he couldn't go on record saying that the boy was truly possessed. "I never made an absolute statement about the things," he said, "because I didn't feel I was qualified." Demonic possession or not, the real-life events of this exorcism served as great plot fodder for a horror movie. Hence, The Exorcist's long-standing reputation as one of the top horror films of all time. Number 3. The Amityville Horror. The story of the Lutz family's paranormal experiences was first showcased in a book by Jay Anson entitled The Amityville Horror. After the book came out, films under the same title were released, the most recent being in 2005. The horror in question happened in 1974 in the neighborhood of Amityville. It was then and there that Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 of his family members in their big Dutch colonial house in Long Island. The next year, when the Lutz family moved into the house, they were haunted by paranormal happenings and abandoned the dwelling after less than a month. Knowing that the gruesome murders had happened there, the Lutzes bought the large 5-bedroom house at a bargain, including a large portion of the DeFeo's furniture, which remained in the house. Acting upon the suggestion of a friend, George Lutz had the place blessed by a Catholic priest named Father Mancuso. As the Lutzes unpacked, Father Mancuso splashed holy water around the house while praying. This is when he heard a deep male voice command, "Get out." The priest later warned the Lutzes not to enter the room on the second floor where he heard the voice. He also developed stigmatic blisters on his hands and a high fever. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to the Lutzes at first. That is, until odd sensations broke the family. George woke up around 3:15 a.m. every day, which he later found was the time DeFeo killed his family. Kathy started to have nightmares about the murders and claimed to have felt an embrace by an unseen force. Throughout the house there were cold spots that went unexplained, odors of excrement and perfume, and swarms of flies, even though it was December. While all of these things could be explained away by the innate fear and paranoia one might feel in a house that was the scene of a killing spree, truly startling things began to happen. George and Kathy both saw a demon's image in the fire, after which the soot showed the half-blown-out head in the fireplace. Their 5-year-old daughter, Missy, suddenly found herself with an imaginary friend called Jody, who she said was a piggy creature, with red ember eyes like a demon. George saw this creature in Missy's bedroom window on Christmas morning, and when he raced to her room she was sound asleep, though her rocking chair continued to rock. And one night, Kathy levitated 2 feet high while in bed, and found her chest covered in red welts. These are just some of the bizarre happenings that occurred while the Lutzes resided in the haunted house. They ended up abandoning it, after a second blessing did not rid of the evil spirits that had taken over the space. Number 2. A Nightmare on Elm Street. This slasher film, which first premiered in 1984 and was revisited in 2010, is not so much based on a single real person as it was on a group of people. Laotian refugees who mysteriously died in their sleep in the late 70s. The New York Times reported that 18 healthy refugees with no symptoms of disease or ill health had suddenly died, and that there seemed to be no foul play involved. The strange thing was that each of the refugees died in the same way, sleeping in their beds and crying out suddenly in terror. Experts at the time diagnosed the fatalities as nightmare death syndrome. In essence, the otherwise healthy refugees had allegedly died from fatal night terrors. But another theory may better explain the sudden and mysterious deaths. After the hearts were examined by Dr. Robert Kirshner, he found what he hypothesized. The 18 refugees shared a genetic defect. The hearts of the victims were enlarged, and the fibers that carried electronic impulses from the brain to the heart had, essentially, short-circuited. This defect, along with the stress of immigrating to a foreign country, triggered by intense nightmares, may have caused the victim's heart to fail. A Nightmare on Elm Street is somewhat inspired by this rare series of deaths, as the villain in the film, Freddy Krueger, murders teenagers in their own nightmares. Number 1. Psycho. The super creepy body snatcher Ed Gein makes another appearance on this list of scary movies inspired by real people. Not only did he inspire the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but his intensely creepy relationship with his mother also inspired the intensely creepy mother-son dynamic of the movie Psycho. This old-school horror flick pits a young man dressed up as his dead mother against unsuspecting victims in his hotel. To recap, Ed Gein was the mentally insane body snatcher who bedecked his home with the trophies of skin and bones that he'd exhumed from bodies he'd stolen from cemeteries, as well as from his own victims. But it was his disturbing relationship with his mother that inspired Psycho. Augusta, Ed Gein's mother, deeply influenced her son, preaching to her boys that women were the devil's instruments and that the world was inherently evil. She'd frequently read graphic verses from the Bible, often those that involved murder and death. Her impact on Ed in particular frightened his brother Henry, to the point that he tried to disparage their mother when she wasn't around in order to tap down Ed's affection for her. This may be why Henry ended up dead while the pair burnt marsh vegetation on the property. Although some people suspected that Ed had murdered his brother, foul play was dismissed and no charges were filed. When his mother grew sick, Ed took care of her. She died of a stroke in 1945, after which Ed was alone. This may be what led to his nocturnal visits to the graveyard to dig up middle-aged women who looked like Augusta. From the bodies, he extracted bones and tanned the skin to create his unsightly paraphernalia. He even built a woman's suit in order to become his own mother. This real-life killer is not a far cry from Norman Bates, the lead in Psycho, who exhumes his mother's corpse and dresses up as her, oscillating between his own persona and that of his mother's, all the while killing the guest of his hotel. Fact, in the end, is often not stranger than fiction. Number 15. The Cursed Tomb. Mummies and curses just seem to go hand in hand, so it should come as no surprise that our first terrifying deadly curse comes from the cursed tomb of Timur. As the story goes, in 1396, Timur became the Great Khan and decided it was best to strike out on a bloody campaign to rival his late relative Genghis Khan, his great-grandfather by blood. And so, he tore through Persia and southern Russia, leaving no man standing. He destroyed whole cities and massacred most of the citizens therein, as evidenced in the sacking of Herat, the capital city of the Khartid dynasty. In Isfatsar, Timur cemented prisoners to the city walls, alive. And in Isfahan, the rebels killed Timur's tax collectors and some of his soldiers, so he revenged them by massacring around 100,000 to 200,000 of the city's citizens, placing their heads on 28 towers. This was to create terror and combat resistance as he continued to conquer the world. As he prepared to battle Delhi, Timur grew even more bloodthirsty. He killed 100,000 captives, and once the city had fallen and the remaining citizens attempted to form an uprising, he ordered a horrific massacre. It is said that the city reeked of the citizens' decomposing bodies, which were left out for the birds while their heads were piled onto structures. His terror continued as he invaded Baghdad in 1401. There, he ordered each soldier to bring him 2 severed heads at the minimum. Once they'd slaughtered everyone, there were no more men to kill, so some soldiers killed prisoners they'd captured earlier, while others returned with their own wives' heads. His legacy left a 70,000-strong pyramid of human skulls in northern India, along with up to 17 million dead, according to some estimates. Needless to say, Timur was a bit of a nasty fellow. Sadistic, egotistical, a smart strategist but legitimately evil. So when he passed away in 1405, it's none too shocking that a curse was laid over his tomb at the Ghuri Amir complex of Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Quebec Khan's jade throne served as a cover for Timur's tomb. On it, inscribed in Arabic text, read the curse, "When I arise from the grave, the world will tremble." And it did tremble in 1941, when Soviet archaeologist Mikhail Mikhailovich Gerasimov was sent by Stalin to excavate the tomb. The Uzbek elders revealed a book to Kuimov, which stated that the tomb of Timur should never be opened, otherwise a war could be provoked. Kuimov didn't listen to this warning and removed Timur's skull on June 21st. The very next day, Russia went to war with the Nazis. Hitler launched an attack called Operation Barbarossa, which made the world tremble indeed. It was the most expansive and vicious invasion of the Second World War. Millions of Soviet civilians and soldiers were lost to the invasion. When, finally, the Soviets gave way to their superstitions on December 20th, 1942 and returned Timur's remains to his tomb, adhering to Islamic burial rites, the Nazis' Operation Winter Storm failed miserably in Stalingrad. Terrifying deadly curse or coincidence? You decide. Or venture into the Mongols' tomb and let Timur's skull decide for you. Before we go any further, do you think curses are real? Let me know in the comments with a simple yes or no. My answer would be yes. Don't disturb the dead. You never know what's attached to them. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person. So if you're generous enough to like this video, then thank you. Number 14. The Tomb of Hameru. While no fatalities have been ascribed to the Tomb of Hameru, there is most certainly a curse detailed on the High Priest's tomb. With 2 false doors, this tomb is terrifying in and of itself, but its ancient curse is even creepier. It states, "I shall seize his neck like that of a goose." If you don't mind having your neck wrung like a goose, visit the tomb and descend the stairway that leads into an open court with an underground chapel. Although the tomb wasn't completed, with its paintings and decor left unfinished, the costly entrance demonstrates how much the High Priest meant to his pharaoh, fitted with limestone, and apparently, a terrifying deadly curse. Number 13. The Cursed Iceman Cometh. Throwback to 1991. The Iceman, aka Ötzi, was uncovered in the stretch of the Alps range between Italy and Austria. Little did those who excavated Ötzi know, the old bat was cursed. The deadly curse killed 7 people linked to his excavation over the next 13 years. While 3 of the deaths were natural, the remaining 4 were crazy violent. So much so that conspiracy theorists have suggested that the Iceman cursed those who dug up his old weathered remains from their 5,300-year-old haunting ground, only to pick him apart for their own amusement. Forensic pathologist Rainer Henn was the curse's first victim. After using his bare hands to place the Iceman in a body bag, he headed to a 1992 World Conference to discuss the group's findings. On the way, he died in a car crash. The curse's second victim, Kurt Fritz, was the mountaineer who guided Henn to the Iceman. He swept away the ice and snow from the dead man's face. He was killed in an avalanche, the only one of his party to have met death that day. The third victim was behind the camera the day they uncovered the Iceman. A brain tumor killed him. Still don't believe in the curse? Well, maybe these next 3 will turn skeptics into believers. The man who found the Iceman, Helmut Simon, was missing for more than a week in 2004. When he was found, he was by a rescue team. Simon laid face down in a creek after falling 300 feet from a cliff to his death. The curse seemed to stalk even Simon's rescue team, as the team-led Dieter Warneck died from a heart attack only an hour after Simon's funeral. Konrad Spindler, archaeologist and lead expert on the Iceman excavation, said of the purported curse, "I think it's a load of rubbish. It's all a media hype. Next thing you'll be saying, I'll be next." And he was next. He passed away of complications from a chronic pre-existing condition of ALS. Lastly, the 7th victim of the curse was Tom Loy, a scientist who found human blood on the Iceman's weapons and clothing. In 2005, he passed away from a hereditary blood disease, a condition that was diagnosed the very year he began working on the Iceman. While many of these deaths are obviously natural, the curse still stands. In fact, the Iceman himself met with an untimely and violent death. He was killed by an arrow and had his skull bashed in. He was a victim too, but the curse that hung over his mummified body for centuries has created many more in his wake. Number 12. The Curse of Superman. The Man of Steel. Superhuman strength, super speed, super hearing, X-ray, and heat vision. Oh yeah, and the power of flight. This kryptonite-dodging superhero may seem like the toughest around, so it may come as a surprise that this superhero is super cursed, or at least the stars who've played him are. The curse is said to have sprung from the artist, Joe Shuster, and the hero's creator, Jerry Siegel, who invented the comic book character for DC Comics. DC held all the rights for the superhero, and paid Shuster and Siegel little for him. In failing to receive just compensation for their creation, the two are said to have possibly placed a curse on the character themselves. Those who have been part of the Superman series have been on the receiving end of some pretty terrifying misfortunes, particularly the leads in the TV series in the first Superman movies, George Reeves and Christopher Reeve, respectively. From 1952 to 1958, George Reeves starred in Adventures of Superman, and in 1959, at age 45, he committed suicide by shooting himself, although the circumstances have been disputed. Christopher Reeve starred in the films from 1978 to 1987. In 1995, he fell from his horse and became tragically paralyzed. He only lived 9 years longer, dying from a heart attack at age 52. Some even believe that JFK fell victim to this deadly curse. His staff had approved a Superman story to be released by DC Comics in April of 1964. In the episode, the hero highlights the physical fitness initiatives put forward by the president. This was shortly before the assassination of JFK. A number of actors have refused to play the Superman role because of this terrifying deadly curse. They don't want to be numbered amongst its subsequent victims. Number 11. The Kennedy Curse. Or maybe Kennedy had his own curse to contend with. He didn't have to go looking for Superman. The Kennedy curse has killed off many Kennedys over the years, reaching way back to 1944. Most notably JFK in 1963, and Bobby Kennedy, his brother, in 1968. Both assassinations are riddled with conspiracy theories, one of which is that they fell prey to the Kennedy curse. But these two primary figures weren't the only Kennedys to have suffered from the curse. In 1944, Joseph P. Kennedy was killed in a plane explosion in England during World War II, while Kathleen Kennedy was also killed in the war in Belgium by sniper fire. In 1963, Jackie O lost her son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, due to a lung ailment after a premature birth. Ted Kennedy, another of the Kennedy brothers, resisted the curse's fatal grip not once, but twice. In 1964, he survived a plane crash that killed the pilot and one of his aides. He suffered a punctured lung, internal bleeding, a broken back, and fractured ribs, but managed to keep his life. In the second incident, he drove off a bridge in Chappaquiddick in 1969, killing his passenger Mary Jo Kopachny. He managed to survive, provoking even further conspiracy surrounding the Kennedy family. Most recently, in 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. was killed in a plane crash over the Atlantic Ocean, along with his wife and her sister. While these terrifying deaths may suggest a curse, the Kennedy curse isn't always deadly. It wreaks havoc in other ways, touching many in the family through various sinister means. Number 10. The Cursed Telephone Number. How can a telephone number be terrifying or deadly? Its owner being spammed to death? A call coming from inside the house? Well, sure, why not? But this particular cursed phone number has a totally different attack mechanism. In the turn of the millennium, the number 088-888-8888 was first issued in Bulgaria by a Bulgarian mobile phone company called Mobiltel. It's been issued several times since, due to every single one of its owners meeting an untimely death. 3 lives in total have been ended seemingly as a result of the cursed telephone number. Originally, the CEO of Mobiltel himself owned the number. Vladimir Grashnov died of cancer in 2001. That's when things got even weirder. Konstantin Dimitrov was the number's next recipient. Being a mafia boss, it's not a huge surprise that he was blown away by the curse. In 2003, he was fatally shot while eating out with a model. The next fateful death came at the tail end of more bullets. This victim was also a crooked character, allegedly a corrupt businessman heading up a drug empire. Konstantin Dishliev was passing by an Indian restaurant in Sofia in 2005 when he was fatally shot. Coincidence, or the bad luck of a cursed phone number? In both Konstantin cases, the likely attackers were Russian operatives who were in the business of taking out their competition. However, the 3 deaths, happening all in odd years, 2 years apart, while all 3 men carried mobile phones with the same creepy number, have led many to question whether the digits, ultimately, are the fault. Mobiltel has since taken the number out of circulation. A Mobiltel rep was asked about the cursed telephone number and replied, "We have no comment to make. We won't discuss individual numbers." Their suspension of the number led some to believe that perhaps they know more than they're letting on. Number 9. The Björkatorp Runestone. The Great Mystery of Sweden is an ancient rune. What is a rune? According to your old battered dictionary, it's any of the characters of certain ancient alphabets, as of a script used for writing the Germanic languages, especially of Scandinavia and Britain. It can also be defined as an aphorism, poem, or saying with mystical meaning or for use in casting a spell, the last of which seems to describe the Björkatorp runestone. This 14-foot monolith can be found in Blekinge, Sweden. 2 other blank menhirs are placed next to the rune, forming a stone circle. The Proto-Norse language casts the cursed in a warning on its face, which reads, I, Master of the Runes, conceal here runes of power. Incessantly plagued by maleficence, doomed to insidious death is he who breaks this monument. In layman's terms, this means the man that breaks this rune will shortly meet his death. The opposite side of the stone indicates the prediction of perdition, or prophecy of destruction. This curse comes from the 6th or 7th century, and its symbols are similar to the Elder Futhark runes, which are the most ancient form of the runic alphabet. 2nd through 8th century Germanic tribes used this alphabet, which contained 24 runes. The Björketorp runestone's purpose has been debated. Some scholars believe it is a marker of some kind. Others think that it served as a shrine to Odin, the Norse god. Still others suggest that it may mark a border between the Danes and the Swedes. But the most popular theory is that the runestone is a burial marker, either a memorial or marking a true gravesite. This may justify warning against the destruction of the stone. However, no human remains were ever uncovered from a 1914 excavation of the area. Setting the stone's purpose aside, the curse of the runestone is local legend, starting with the terrifying death of a local man. He attempted to remove the stone from the land by piling wood around it in order to heat it enough to crack the stone by pouring cold water on it. The day was calm, still, not a breath of wind. But as the legend goes, once the man started the fire, a huge wind roared, blowing the flames toward the man. The fire around the Björketorp runestone died, as did the man, once his hair was set on fire. The unfortunate victim of this curse died a painful death. Fortunately, no one has attempted to remove the stone since, so there have been no additional victims of this curse. The rune remains standing to this day, a threat to all who suggest its removal or destruction. Number 8. The Omen. The Omen was the brainchild of Robert Munger, who warned the film's producer Harvey Bernhard that the devil's greatest single weapon is to be invisible, and you're gonna take off his cloak of invisibility to millions of people. This statement conceived a curse the likes of which no horror film has ever seen. The film's cast and crew were seemingly stalked by Satan even before production began. One of the first victims of the curse was Gregory Peck, the film's star. Tragedy struck when his son killed himself 2 months prior to filming. But it didn't end there. Satan really didn't want Peck in the film, as he tried to scare the actor to death on his transatlantic flight to start filming. His plane was struck by lightning, setting the engine on fire and nearly crash-landing the aircraft into the sea. A producer for the film, Mace Newfield, crossed the Atlantic a few days later, and his flight was also struck by lightning. He too lived. Yikes. During production, Satan continued in his meddling. Among the first shots of the film was an aerial view of London. A plane was rented for the shot, but in the end the aircraft was switched by the rental company in order for the original plane to be used to transport some Japanese businessmen. The devil himself couldn't have predicted this switch, so the businessman's plane came crashing down, killing every single one of the innocent curse victims instantly. Onward, the curse continued as a stuntman was brutally attacked by trained Rottweilers in one of the film's most iconic scenes. The trainer attempted to call the pack off, but they continued to bite through the stuntman's thick padding and nearly killed him. Yet another animal attack killed Sidney Bamford, a tiger wrangler, on set. Bamford hadn't secured the tigers properly, and one of the wild beasts launched at him, biting his face off. Needless to say, the curse was brutal and violent. It became even more violent when it failed to kill the film producer Newfield in his transatlantic flight. During filming, he was staying at the Hilton in London when the hotel exploded. However, Satan had failed, yet again, to take Newfield's life, and so, with help from the IRA, he blew up a London restaurant a few days later as Newfield was en route to it. Thwarted again by Hollywood producer. But perhaps the most ominous of the curse attacks occurred after the film was released on 6/6/76. John Richardson, the film's special effects consultant, was the mastermind behind the Omen's bloody death scenes. In the film, one of the most gruesome scenes involved a plate of glass beheading Keith Jennings, a photographer. After the film was released, Richardson went on to film A Bridge Too Far in Holland. On Friday the 13th, a week after The Omen had been released, Richardson and Liz Moore, his assistant, were the victims of a head-on collision. Moore was decapitated by a wheel from the other vehicle, mirroring the Keith Jennings death scene. Richardson awoke from the tragic crash to find the kilometer marker Omen 66.6. The accident occurred at the 66.6 mile marker near Omen, Netherlands. Could the curse get any more terrifying? Number 7. The Cursed Musicians. Ever heard of the 27 Club? Alright, well you're about to. The club refers to a league of musicians who've been cursed by the number 27. That is, they've all met their untimely deaths at this ripe young age. Who are the unwilling members of this club? Kurt Cobain, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and Brian Jones, just to name a few. These musicians were generational voices, cultural icons, and defined what it means to be a rock star. They were also drug addicts, each dying from drug-related deaths at the age of 27. Kurt Cobain had attempted suicide prior to his death at 27. He'd overdosed in Rome in 1994. His wife, Courtney Love, found him unconscious with a toxic mix of Rohypnol and champagne in his belly. He was revived at a local hospital and returned to Seattle. After this incident and a second one where Cobain had locked himself in a room with a gun, Love arranged an intervention with those Cobain loved in order to address his drug use. Cobain eventually agreed to enter into a detox program, but in a short time he climbed over a 6-foot fence to escape the rehab facility. He flew back to Seattle where on April 8th his body was found by an electrician. Cobain had shot himself in the face. He left a note addressing his imaginary friend Bada, declaring that he'd not felt the excitement of listening to, as well as creating music, along with really writing, for too many years now. His body was filled with diazepam and heroin, and had been there for days. The prominent list of club members continues, with Joplin overdosing on heroin, Morrison likely overdosing as well and found dead in the bathtub, Hendrix being asphyxiated by his own vomit, and Jones drowning in a pool. But the list of curse victims doesn't end there. The club has initiated 41 members, with its first victim dating back to 1892, when Alexander Levy, famed Brazilian musician, died mysteriously at the age of 27. The cause of death was undisclosed, but medical records show he had no prior illness. Further victims of the curse include ragtime musician Louis Chauvin, who died of neurosyphilitic sclerosis, the inventor of the blues, Robert Johnson, who is said to have sold his soul to the devil and, in return, was taken prematurely at 27, and more recently, Amy Winehouse, who died of alcohol poisoning after spending the night alone, allegedly watching YouTube videos of herself. The latest member to join the club is Zambian musician Lily Tembo. She passed away in September 2009 from gastritis and anemia. So, whether the curse takes its victims through a drug overdose, a soul sold to the devil, or your everyday natural causes, the 27 Club has claimed the lives of many, and may claim many more to come. Watch your backs, musical prodigies. Number 6. The Curse of Tutankhamun. Our dear old Egyptian friend Tutankhamun had a curse or two to deliver his excavators. When his final resting place was opened in 1922 by Henry Carter, the archaeologist found the ancient tomb nearly intact, which seemed to be a miracle to him and Lord Carnarvon, the search's financial backer. That is, until the curse hit home. Lord Carnarvon was the curse's first victim. A few months after the tomb had been opened, he was taken to Cairo after suddenly falling ill. Several days later, he died of an unknown cause at the age of 57. His medical record suggests that a festering infection from an insect bite may be the cause of death. At his time of death, legend says that a power outage struck all of Cairo into darkness for a short while. Even more terrifying, thousands of miles away on Carnarvon's estate in England, his dog is said to have howled in agony and then dropped dead simultaneously, as reported by Carnarvon's son. To add to the curse's legitimacy, when Tutankhamun's mummy was unwrapped in 1925, his remains are said to have held evidence of the curse. A wound on the ancient emperor's left cheek was strategically positioned on the same spot as Carnarvon's insect bite. The curse continued to wreak havoc on those connected with the tomb's discovery. 7 years after its excavation, 11 people had been killed prematurely by unnatural causes. The curse continued to follow the Carnarvon family and his relations, killing off his personal secretary Richard Bethel, Bethel's father, and 2 of Carnarvon's relatives. Bethel is said to have been in perfect health and is believed to have been smothered to death in his sleep. Lord Westbury, Bethel's father, committed suicide by jumping off a building. His suicide note read, "I really cannot stand any more horrors and hardly see what good I am going to do here, so I'm making my exit." The curse is said to have taken the lives of more than 20 others who were somehow linked to the tomb's excavation. Also making their exits were Edgar Steele, the handler of the tomb's artifacts at the British Museum, and Sir Ernest Wallace Budge, who was also responsible for displaying the artifacts at the museum's Department of Egyptian and Assyrian Antiquities. Nothing like an Egyptian curse to take down dozens of innocents. Number 5. The Hope Diamond. Dating back to 1642, the Hope Diamond has spelt out misfortune for many of its owners. The 25.60mm by 21.78mm by 12mm diamond is a whopping 45.52 carats, remarkable for its astounding beauty, clarity, color, and of course, its size. Perhaps its cursed history claims the title as its most wondrous detail. The blue-faceted ovoid diamond, set in a 16 white diamond pendant, has an infamous past. Legend has it that a stealthy thief named Tavernier stole the prominent jewel from its Indian origin. The diamond was said to be placed in the eye or on the forehead of a Hindu statue of the goddess Sita. After Tavernier had sold the diamond, he traveled to Russia, presumably to steal more cursed jewels, where he was torn to shreds by wild dogs, a terrifyingly deadly way to go. The master jewel was later passed to King Louis XVI, who also met a horrifically violent death as he was beheaded alongside his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, for high treason and crimes against the state. A number of other deaths have been associated with the diamond, including that of a Dutch jeweler who was tasked with recutting the diamond. The jeweler, Wilhelm Falls, was his son's victim in a murder-suicide. Greek merchant Simon Moncharides was also a previous owner of the Hope Diamond. With his wife and child in the car, he drove over a cliff and killed them all. These are just a handful of unfortunates who have been touched by death over the years due to this wretched curse. You can visit the Smithsonian Institute and take a gander at this inexplicable jewel. That is, unless you care to live another day. Number 4. Tecumseh, the Curse of the Dead Presidents. The Tecumseh Curse has led to the demise of some of the most powerful men on Earth, that is, US presidents, elected in a decade year. Nearly every president that has been put into the Oval Office on a year ending in 0 has had an untimely death, and often a gruesome one. The Tecumseh's curse is said to have originated from President Harrison's electoral run. Harrison was victorious at the 1811 Battle of Tippecanoe, winning over the Native American leader Tecumseh, who allegedly delivered this curse in response, running onto the slogan, "Tippecanoe and Tyler too." Harrison was elected in the year 1840 and served as president for a grand total of 1 month, after which he died from a cold. He'd given a speech in the rain, leading to a fatal infection. The assassinations of Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy are all associated with the curse. Lincoln was elected in 1860, Garfield was elected in 1880, McKinley was elected in 1900, and Kennedy was elected in 1960. Additionally, Presidents Warren Harding, elected in 1920, and FDR, elected in 1940, both died in office, with Harding suffering a stroke and FDR a brain hemorrhage. The curse was broken by Reagan and George W. Bush, although Reagan just narrowly missed its vengeance as he, quite literally, dodged a bullet in the 1981 assassination attempt. Number 3. The Touch of Death. Bruce and Brandon Lee, famed martial artists and film stars, both passed away unexpectedly from the purported curse of the Dim Mak, also known as the Touch of Death. In martial arts, the Dim Mak relates to a sequence of touching specific body parts, which is said to result in death. According to some, Bruce Lee died from his 1973 cerebral edema after falling victim to the so-called Touch of Death. Even more eerily, his son, Brandon Lee, died on the set of The Crow in 1993. He was accidentally shot to death by what was supposed to be a dummy cartridge from a prop gun. Unfortunately, the prop team had created their own dummy cartridges by pulling the bullets from live rounds, but one was not sorted properly, resulting in a fatal shot to Lee's abdomen. Number 2. The Curse of the Little Bastard. James Dean infamously died in his Porsche Spider, which he'd nicknamed the Little Bastard. On September 30th, 1955 at 5:45 p.m., the movie star and his icon became the first victim of the car's curse after suffering a broken neck in a head-on collision. The other car's driver, Donald Durnipseed, received minor injuries, while Dean's passenger, Rolf Woltherick, was thrown from the vehicle but lived. Dean was not so lucky, having been pinned inside the Porsche. This tragic event would have been deemed just that had the Porsche not become involved in several additional seemingly cursed deaths that occurred in the wreck's aftermath. George Barris, master car customizer, purchased the wrecked Porsche for $2,500. When it was being unloaded into Barris's garage, the wreck fell on one of the mechanics and broke both of his legs. While this incident in itself wasn't deadly, Barris felt it was ominous, and so he followed the curse to parts sold from the vehicle. In October of 1956, 2 cars which were fitted with parts from the Little Bastard were racing at Pomona Fairgrounds. The curse came after the 2 physicians who raced these cars, William Eschrid and Troy McHenry. Eschrid's car was flipped during the race when it locked up spontaneously as he turned a corner. He survived, though he suffered serious injuries. McHenry was not so fortunate. The engine of the little bastard had been installed in his race car, and McHenry somehow lost control of the vehicle, hitting a tree and killing him. Further accidents related to the Porsche were said to have occurred until it disappeared in 1960. To this day, no one knows where the cursed bastard's remains have been laid to rest. Number 1. The Cursed Wedding. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you might consider cursed weddings to be the norm. But as bloody as Thrones weddings can get, the real-life wedding of Maria Vittoria del Pozzo, the 6th Princess della Cisterna, may just rival those fictional weddings. King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy was against his son's engagement from the start. When Prince Amadeo of Savoy proposed to Maria, he was met with outright opposition from his father, who believed the Duchess consort was beneath him because she wasn't of royal birth. The headstrong Prince Amadeo went against his father's wishes and married Maria anyway on May 30th, 1867. The wedding day, however, did not go according to plan. To begin with, the woman who had been tasked with laying out Maria's wedding dress decided to hang herself in it instead. Thus, the princess had to rush to find another gown. Once the bridal party had taken care of that mishap, they set out for the church. On the way, the bridal procession led by the colonel was stalled as he dropped dead from sunstroke, falling off his horse. At the palace gates, another death delayed them. The gatekeeper was found in a pool of blood. The curse continued at the wedding feast, when the prince's best man promptly shot himself in the head in lieu of a toast. The couple decided to flee the curse, heading to a train station in order to leave town, but were, again, stalled by an internal brain hemorrhage that killed their marriage contractor. Shortly thereafter, the station master was stampeded to death after being pulled under the bridal carriage. Talk about carnage. That's 6 dead and counting. King Victor, perhaps superstitious after all this death, decided to call the wedding party back to the safety of the palace. Unfortunately, another of the wedding party, the Count of Castiglione, was stampeded as well after being pulled under the wedding carriage. Though the wedding was over, the curse continued. Princess Maria and Prince Amadeo didn't even make it to their 10-year anniversary, as Maria died at the ripe young age of 29 due to complications in childbirth.
Number 15. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I am on the rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared and no car drove past. Now here's where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I'm sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO horror movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up or down while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that the battery must be failing or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that's the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why the fuck am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the fuck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350 north and 50 west. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead. So I got on my phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy or they would call bullshit on the whole story, and I can't blame them. If someone came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. Number 14. My mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like, "I don't know," and just drop it for a long time. So a couple of months later, Mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor, like she was really happy and at peace for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mom says she doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said at first it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralyzed her somehow, and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently, they told her all sorts of things, stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year and it would be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They told her it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They had told her that they also abducted my mother, another time, after the first incident. Mom says she has no recollection of any potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says, "You will know eventually." And she says once she had learned of the truth, then everything became wonderful. Mom had seen her a few more times over the years. We live in another state from her, and she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. Number 13. Okay, here it goes. The first time I had ever seen anything, I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to like to climb on the top of my mom's Suburban in the driveway and stare at the stars. One night, I saw an intensely bright floating light over the tree line, probably about half a mile away. I hollered, but no one came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I still can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out to my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, strobing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon, behind my friend's place, and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop, sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out of the driveway. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway, the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw two dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1. About 6 or 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe going 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up, completely silent. The way they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights, which were about 30 to 40 feet across, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 and 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over louder and slower than the first 4 had. Then it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. What I could best compare it to would be this sound, followed immediately by this sound. That's the best I could find. Take those 2 sounds, except make it digital, and multiply it by 50. This was loud. The craft did that twice. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple of weeks later. I was standing in my driveway, smoking a cigarette, listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the back light, waved my hand over it a couple times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything come up, but I got that being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with round edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me, completely silent for maybe 10 to 15 seconds, while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved my hand in a friendly manner. It then changed light patterns and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew that I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think that it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. I have seen the same craft on 3 other different occasions, once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was nighttime and I was with friends. Over the overlook, I saw a gray craft facing my direction that looked similar to the Hoth fighter. Forgive the Star Wars references. As soon as I saw it, it took off to the right silently and extremely quick. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa, the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, then the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, move slower, but they still have tails that stream behind them. They can also appear in many different colors. One strange story is one night when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream, I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was laying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs around my junk. It seemed very strange to me since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs. The next morning, I went to let the dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother, and she had told me she had heard a noise that woke her the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Inglewood neighborhood. It was nighttime, and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over, and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had what looked like white electric currents coming off of both sides of it. I looked at it, and maybe 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left at one time, at a quick pace, leaving the trail behind it that I previously talked about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward until the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've had a bunch of experiences with orbs, some solid lit that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up to great intensity and then fade as they pass. After that first big experience, I started doing some research because I was so confused. I understand that I've had an abnormally large amount of experiences, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contactee. These people are similar to abductees, except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I've had so many experiences, and I've only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would be, since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep up with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people that I can talk with about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I could uncover. I'm grateful, but still don't know much about my experiences. If you all can get anything out of what I shared, then great. Number 12. It was at night. I was woken up. Don't remember that part. I was standing in front of barely open doors. They were made partially of glass so I could see through them. I was staring at them and knew what was going to happen. He was going to visit me. Now I couldn't tell you consciously who he was, but I felt his presence. He floated or had this strange way of walking in a fluid way. It seems like he just levitated to me. First, I could see his big white head, which had a strangely flat profile. He approached me. His face was no more than 30 centimeters from mine. He was a typical alien gray, but he was not short. I'm 185 centimeters and he was slightly higher than me. He approached me so close that I really couldn't see anything else besides his big black almond eyes. He stared at me, or through me. With each passing second, I felt like I was getting closer and closer to him. Now immediately, when he approached my face, he started doing something. I don't believe in ghosts, but what he did I can only compare to eating my soul. I felt like he took the deepest part of my very being. He started showing me things, displaying feelings to me. It was so intense I really couldn't process it consciously. It was dozens of different sensations, pictures of ending Earth. He showed me why I was insignificant. I remember hearing hundreds of souls screaming as they couldn't handle the experience. He showed me what he did to them. I wanted to turn my head from him, but I couldn't. His head was attracting my sight like a strong magnet. I could see vibrations coming from around his head. When he wasn't projecting feelings to me, he was saying something to me, or maybe communicating thoughts. It will sound strange, but he did not talk to me in a language, yet I could hear his voice. It was the most powerful thing I've ever heard, and it was inside of my head. His thoughts were so extremely well put. I've tried to fight this entry into my head, but I've never felt so overwhelmed. I can compare it to dueling a modern computer in arithmetics only using Asbascus. Now, I don't believe he was evil. What he has shown me was that we as humanity are really not worth that much. He showed me my struggles, what I care for, and then made me realize it's really insignificant. He projected to me that we are part of a bigger scheme, but we are truly redundant. They have a need for us, but it's just part of their plan, and they know many other worlds. Next thing I remember, I woke up in the morning. I've told everyone about it. I've got bad looks, but I know it was real. It was no dream. The guy was real, and he's the most powerful being I've ever met or heard about. I haven't even seen such a powerful creature in any movie. He projected omnipotence and a deep sense of knowing. What I also remember is that there were other beings like him, but they weren't really separate. They either were different avatars of him, or they formed a collective consciousness or had one purpose in mind. What I don't understand is why visit me and do these things. What purpose would that serve to anyone? It was 4 years ago, but I still remember it vividly. Number 11. I was first abducted in 1987. I was 12 years old. I say abducted, but it's not like that. Actually, you go willingly. It's scary, but it's exciting too. And they somehow make you feel okay about things. It's not until later that you feel bad or like you've been violated. And they don't do a lot of probing, like raping or anything like that. That's Hollywood nonsense. They look inside of people sometimes, but they have machines to do it. Not really machines, but it's like a room where things get done